Okay, everyone, welcome to the SOB 24 team reveal. Here we're going to be finding out what team everyone got, as well as giving a relatively in-depth breakdown of teams, rosters, divisions, how everything meshes with users, and how impactful everything will be on everyone. So, getting right into like the kind of system that we're going to be gauging everyone off of here. This is going to be the threat levels here. As you can see at the top, Dynasty means you are a legit threat to win multiple Super Bowls. This is going to be saved for um, top users with teams that either will become potential dynasties based off of the user's pedigree, or users with already loaded rosters that are top users. Contenders, you expect them to always be contending, obviously, and competing for a Super Bowl, but they aren't always necessarily going to get there, and you don't expect them to get multiple Super Bowls. So contenders probably, you expect to get one. The maximum is probably two, but there's probably only a few people in that range. Most people, if you're expected to win two, you're in the dynasty tier, or if you're expected or a legit threat rather to win multiple, two or more. Um, the playoff tier, you're almost always in the playoffs, but you're not seen as a true contender. There's always users like this every year in SOB. Um, so predicting who that is going to be this year, it's probably the smallest tier because there's a fine line between making the playoffs every year, but not being a contender, but also not really missing the playoffs. So it's probably the smallest range of users we have in that tier. Fringe is always in the playoff mix, but misses it about half the time. So they're kind of always in the mix to get the playoffs. Not even necessarily half the time, but they're always right there. And maybe they miss it more than half the time. Maybe they make it more than half the time, but they're kind of just always on the cusp and not like kind of a playoff lock per se. Um, so that can be kind of a result of a lot of different things, as we'll get into based off the team. Scrappy, you're probably going to make probably less than three or less playoff appearances, or at least I'm guessing that's what you're going to make. But you're going to keep a lot of games close. You're going to pull off a lot of really good upsets over users that are at the top of the league in the regular season. You might even get a couple in the playoffs when you get there finally. Um, and then the underdog, you'll be expected to lose most games, and you're really not expected to make many, if any, playoff appearances. And after covering all of those, we're going to get into the team reveals, all the draft picks of all the teams that were selected. We're going to count backwards from 32 all the way to 1 to build up anticipation and to make it more interesting. So starting with our number 32 team here. We have the 32nd pick. We have KJ. I have him at threat level playoffs here, and he is the Cardinals, as you can see there. Um, I didn't really know where to place him because there are a lot of reasons. First reason is we've never really seen him play a full season in SOB, so there's not really much to go off of there. Second reason is he is the Cardinals. So it's really tough to start off as the Cardinals. They're not the worst team ever. I mean, based off of our drafting, I suppose they are the worst team. But in talking in terms of the wide scope of every SOB that we've ever played, this is not the worst team that anyone has ever had, if that makes any sense. They have some pieces to work off of. They have some draft picks. They have extra draft picks, as I've been informed of. They have, I think, multiple firsts, multiple draft picks in general. So a stockpile for him to build off of there. So that's really interesting. I have him at playoffs because ultimately we don't really know what he's going to bring to the table for 100%. He's been touted as a great user, a top user, which the people that have have said that. I respect their opinions and hold them very highly. So going purely off of that, coupled with the fact that as we wind in here, we're going to find out the division that he's in is going to allow for him to make some playoff runs, um, as well as I think once he has this team constructed, once he gets them the way he wants them, I think that he'll be able to consistently lock in his spot in the playoffs. Now, the question is, will he be able to contend? I think the playoffs is kind of like a placeholder threat level rating for him because, like, the question is, will he be able to build this Cardinals team to contend? Traditionally, as far as I'm aware, he's used to being able to have a lot more flexibility with trading and maneuverability from a roster standpoint. With SOB, it's a lot more strict with the way we allow roster movements to happen. That's just the reality of it to prevent a lot of, just foolish moves by players or users that may not even remain in the league, and the list goes on. So, from a roster building standpoint, will he have this team to where they can exceed the playoff rating? I think even if he's unable to construct the team that he envisions, I think he will at least get to the playoff rating. Now, will he get up to contender, dynasty, anything of that nature? That is yet to be seen. But getting into this roster a little bit here, because they don't have much to really talk about from a real life standpoint or a Madden standpoint. Obviously, Buda Baker is the star player on the team. He's going to either be a big asset in the trading route if he wants to trade Buda Baker, move him for draft pick capital, move him for another younger player, whatever he wants to do. Buda Baker is the number one asset, or whether he wants to rebuild the defense around Buda Baker, that'll be up to him. But that is the superstar player on this team. And then you get into the real like franchise core pieces. You have Rondell Moore and Hollywood, which is the strength of this team, in my opinion, from a Madden standpoint. You have two younger receivers who can stretch the field vertically. I believe Hollywood has 97 speed. Rondell Moore has 94 speed. So you have two receivers on the smaller side, but they can stretch the field vertically and kind of take the top off the defense, as well as getting them the ball in open space, and they can make people miss and hit their head on the goalpost. So that in my opinion is the most valuable part of this team. Rondell Moore and Hollywood, obviously. You also have the two rookies, BJ Ajulari and Paris Johnson, the tackle. So they're both rookies. Those are both foundational cornerstones, probably, of what he's going to build here, I would assume. And then the question mark is Kyler Murray. Like, are you going to build around Kyler Murray? Are you going to try to develop Kyler Murray? Are you going to move Kyler Murray with that big contract? That's kind of the big question mark with this, because the way Madden has and EA has him constructed, in the sense that I think he's lower than an 80 overall and either normal or star development, to where he doesn't have any abilities either. And a lot of people have speculated on the paranoid trait when under pressure, and if he still has that, I'm not really sure. But a lot of question marks around Kyler Murray. So whether he builds around him or not is a big question mark. But the big foundational pieces that we talked about, Buda Baker, Rondell Moore, Hollywood, Paris Johnson Jr., BJ Ajulari, I think are all going to either be trade assets, big trade assets for him, or he's going to construct the team around him. I don't really even know how he likes to construct his teams, because I haven't seen him do it before, so I can't speculate on that. And this is the biggest question mark probably in the entire draft is, how well is KJ going to do with these Cardinals? So I'm excited to see it, and it should be really interesting and fun to see how he constructs the team and what he decides to do with the assets that the Cardinals have. Doing that, we're going to move on to our number 31 team here. We got E, or Eric, the second member already of the NFC West revealed. So we have two picks off the board, two teams off the board, and two NFC West teams off the board, the Cardinals and the Rams. A lot of people speculated those would be two of the bottom teams, not necessarily the two bottom teams. But there you have it. That also kind of gives you a little bit more insight into the previous comment I made with KJ and talking about his division, could be on the weaker side just because, a lot of people at the top, or rather the bottom, are, taking these NFC West teams that are left here. But you have E. He has the Rams, obviously. You obviously have Aaron Donald. You have Cooper Kupp. You have Matt Stafford. You have those cornerstones, I guess, of that team. But they're all on the older side. They all kind of are on these big guaranteed contracts. So it's hard to move them. It's hard to kind of maximize the rest of their prime because you don't have a lot of surrounding pieces around them. I'm not sure if the Rams still lack draft capital or not the beginning of this year or not. But all of these reasons collectively kind of formulate the reason why I have him as an underdog, which is the lowest rating, because this team just is in a really rough spot from a roster constructing standpoint. It's going to be really hard for him to get the team where he wants it to be. It's going to take him an extra long time because he's kind of hampered by salary cap, by a few players that are older. And I could see that he does pull off some upsets, especially early on with this team, because of the superstar talent that he has. He could absolutely win some games, but I don't see him really making many playoff runs, and I don't see him ultimately making many playoffs in general, just because of how set back he is by the roster, by the salary cap. If he got a perfect team with his skill set and scheme, he could have, been higher rated, but it's just a rough spot for anyone to be in. And he's already thrown in with KJ in a division, so it's already him and KJ. KJ's supposed to be like this up and coming superstar caliber user, so it's already rough on him in that department. And we'll get into more of the NFC West later on, where we'll talk about kind of how he fits in there. But because of the roster building, like we said, the difficulty there, the lack of talent, the lack of draft capital, and then E's specific skill set that he has in general, where you kind of have to construct a team specifically to suit him for him to be able to make a run. All of those things kind of add up to the underdog threat level there. But he does get the Rams, and that kind of covers the 31st ranking. So after that, we do the number 30 team. The number 30 pick, as you can see, New Orleans Saints. Swag, obviously, here. This is really interesting. There's a lot to delve into here with the Saints and Swag here. This is a really interesting meshing of team and user. There's a lot to get into, as we said. I have him as fringe, as you can see, which is kind of like a middling threat level. Obviously, there is underdog and then scrappy and then fringe, so it's third from the bottom. Fringe is obviously, as we described, it is teams who kind of make the playoffs half the time. And being the first user to be rated in the NFC South, saying that he's going to make the playoffs half the time is interesting because you're like, well, he's the lowest ranked user in his division. How is he going to make the playoffs half the time? And we'll get into that more as we reveal more of the NFC South. So that's going to be an interesting discussion in the scope of the division as we move forward with that. But just keep that in mind. That's a big reason why he's threat level fringe. There's a lot of other reasons, as we'll get into here now. Obviously, you have Honey Badger still on this team, who's the highest rated player on this team, probably going to be the leader of the defense. Could be trade capital for Swag. But in my mind, without revealing too much, I see Swag personally having a lot of early success with the way this team is set up. They have a lot of veteran defenders. They have Honey Badger, as we mentioned. They have Demario Davis. They have Cam Jordan. They have Marcus May. They have a lot of veteran defenders that are on the back end of their careers, but are still playing at a good level, a quality level that's going to allow him to have early success, in my opinion. I think that's how it's going to go. Whether he reconstructs this team to be able to repeat that type of success early on is to be determined. But I think he's going to have a lot of early success with this team. You get into Lattimore, who's probably the biggest asset on this team. Marshawn Lattimore is going to be probably lockdown corner for him, allow him to kind of shift his scheme to wherever he wants to do. Does he want to play zone? Does he want to play man? Lattimore is going to be the biggest part of that. We don't really know what's going to happen with that. You obviously have the offensive line's pretty well cemented. It's not the best offensive line in the league, but for picking a team at 30, this offensive line is as good as it gets for a 30th ranked pick. You have Ryan Ramczyk spearheading the unit. You have Eric McCoy at center. You have Cesar Ruiz at guard. You have some interesting pieces there along the offensive line. Obviously, with the weapons, you have Kamara, who spearheads the weapons. You have Chris Olave, who's a really interesting young receiver. You still have Michael Thomas there, which the way Swag plays, I see him getting utilized properly and effectively, which with a lot of other users that are even higher ranked than him, I do not see that with. But with Swag's diversity of play calling, ability to kind of utilize his star players, feed them at times that it is conducive for him to get fed, I think that is a good move. This is a good team for Swag, especially to get them at 30 is kind of a steal in my opinion. So yeah, I think he's with a lot of these defenders that we mentioned, this offensive line, these weapons. I think he's going to have a lot of early success. I think Derek Carr is a good quarterback for him to start with. It's a good bridge quarterback. I think it's going to help him run his offense. I think Kamara is going to get a bunch of touches in the receiving and rushing game every game. I think that the diversity of play calling is going to be at a high level. I think the defense is going to be rolling on all cylinders. I think it's going to be a fun time to watch Swag operate with this Saints team, especially early on, probably the first 3 seasons with these defenders. He is personally my favorite within this division without revealing the other members of the division to run the division the first few seasons, in my opinion. Might be a hot take, but that's my opinion. And then you get into the rookies a little bit, right? Alante Taylor, the young corner, the young stud corner, the rookie that they drafted in the second round. I think he'll be kind of one of the building stones on the future, as well as Brian Barisi. So if he wants to continue what I believe he will have early success in the second half of SOB as well he will have in the first half, Brian Barisi and Alante Taylor need to be big parts of that. They need to be developed, and they need to make big plays later on. They need to be developed early on. I personally am predicting early success from him and him to fall off a little bit later, taper off, maybe pick it back up at the back end of SOB this year. Because I think it's going to take him time to reconstruct this team. This team, obviously, I believe, is still struggling salary cap wise. They had a big payday with Derek Carr. They have a lot of moving pieces, but early on, I love the fit with Swag to the Saints. It's a great fit. I think he's going to have early success. I think he's going to make some playoff berths early on. I think he's probably going to get a playoff win or two. I'm expecting him to far exceed his 30th ranking. I have no idea why he was voted 30th. I substantially disagree with that. I think that's one of the rankings I disagree with the most in the draft. But that kind of covers why I have him at threat level fringe. And I think this fit's going to be interesting. I think this division as a whole is going to be interesting. As we get further into discussion, we'll talk about Swag more as we reveal more of the teams in the NFC South. But for now, that's kind of where we have him. And we're going to move on to number 29. And as you can see, it is the New England Patriots. Jason got the Pats. It's the first AFC team off the board. I have them at threat level underdog, which is the lowest. A lot of it isn't because of Jason necessarily. A lot of it is because of the strength of his division, which we'll get into, the strength of the conference as a whole, which we'll get into as we progress, and the deficiencies of the roster of the New England Patriots. But getting into kind of the fit, generally speaking, before delving into the roster, I think that there's going to be some adjustments that need to be made and some roster moves that need to be made for Jason to fully kind of fit this roster. I don't feel like this is the worst fit that we have. I don't even feel like it's. I don't feel like it's even necessarily close to the worst fit. It's somewhere middling if we're rating off of fit. user to team. It isn't terrible, but it also isn't ideal for Jason. You have some aspects of the team that fit what he wants to do, and you have some aspects of the team that just don't. So getting into it, I guess the roster as a whole, the best player is Matt Judon. He's going to be your playmaker. He's going to be the game changer. He's going to be the guy that if you pull off a lot of upsets, if you wind up somehow making a playoff run, he's probably going to lead the league in sacks. He's going to create a lot of turnovers. He's going to wreak a lot of havoc. He's going to rack up the tackle for losses, everything like that. You got a lot of other veteran, defensive, quality players that are kind of on the precipice of potentially turning into superstars if you can develop them or get a lucky breakout game. Those players include, but are not limited to, Kyle Duggar, obviously, as you can see on the screen. Really good safety. He's right there. He's young enough to where he could have a breakout game, get a superstar trait, and be more impactful for him on the field. You got Jawan Bentley, the linebacker, obviously, who's kind of just like leading that linebacking core there. You got Jabril Peppers on the other side of Kyle Duggar as the technical free safety, even though New England does a lot of rotating safeties where there's not a true free or strong safety per se. So whether Jason follows that or not will be up to him. I don't know if he's going to, utilize Jabril Peppers as a true free safety or if he can rotate him a lot. I don't know. It's kind of up to him. But again, a good piece to have, Jabril Peppers. Jonathan Jones, who kind of is technically, to start off, the best corner, but he's not the most valuable corner in this team and certainly doesn't have the highest ceiling. But early on, he'll probably take the best receiver for Jason and the Pats. And then you got Josh Uche, who's kind of like going to be in the opposite end to Judon, probably getting a lot of single teams. Potentially, if Judon creates a lot of opportunities for him to get rack up some sacks, Uche can potentially get that breakout game because he's going to have a lot more opportunities because of Judon that will create it for him. Obviously, I think the biggest and best part of this team for Jason and the fit of this team to Jason is the offensive line and the tight ends. You have Mike Unwenu, who's the guard, the best rated offensive lineman on this team via EA. David Andrews, the center, and Trent Brown, who's a tackle. Those are big guys who can move people, as well as Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki. So I expect a lot of 22 personnel from Jason, a lot of ball control offense, a lot of pace of play, the slow pace of play, where he kind of doesn't necessarily milk the clock, but he plays at a slower pace, because he knows he's not going to be able to keep up with these high-octane offenses that are moving up and down the field at will. Like, he doesn't want to do that. It's not how he wants to play, especially with the way this Patriots team is constructed. He just doesn't have the firepower to keep up with that. So he kind of wants to play to his strength, which is allow this defense to make plays, allow this defense to force users to drive the length of the field, try to create some turnovers, try to hold people to field goals, and then on offense, grind the ball and work off play action with that 22 personnel with Mike Gesicki and Hunter Henry and that good offensive line. And of course, you have Ramondre Stevenson, and then they picked up and acquired recently Zeke Elliott to kind of change the pace a little bit there. So that's a really good 1-2 punch. I like that for Jason. That's the best part of this team for Jason, I think, is the offensive line. The two tight ends and the running backs, I think, are going to work well with his play style. He's going to be able to control the pace of play a little bit more and potentially be in a lot more games. And then you get into the best part of this team upside-wise, and you talk about Christian Gonzalez, who is the stud first-round corner that they took, who is going to be an absolute beast for Jason, I think, and is going to, how quickly he develops will determine how good this defense can be early on. I think this can be really good later on, depending on how Jason facilitates it. But I think early on, the speed of development for Christian Gonzalez is going to determine how good this defense can be early on. And of course, you have the more developmental corners who maybe could be trade assets year one for Jason if he doesn't want to build them all or develop them all, would be Amir Speed and Isaiah Bolden. They're both fast young corners who will be, coveted by other users. Maybe Jason doesn't want to try to have to build Christian Gonzalez, build Amir Speed, build Isaiah Bolden, as well as trying to build, a bunch of offensive players to try to construct a quality offense, et cetera. It's just a lot. You only have a certain amount of resources. You obviously can only build a certain amount of players. So where does he want to devote his resources? Maybe he doesn't want to devote them all to corner. So maybe he wants to move one of those guys, maybe two of those guys. Um, and then, of course, you have Tyquan Thornton on the offensive side to kind of be the guy to take the top off. You have Juju Smith-Schuster. You have Kendrick Bourne still on the offensive side. You have Mac Jones distributing the ball. I kind of like the fit offensively for Jason. Defensively, um, because of the multiple scheme, the hybrid scheme of the Patriots, the complexity that kind of they're intended to use defensively, with the heavy man coverage, the mixture of zones, the safeties dropping and trading off. Like a lot of the different looks that the Patriots are built and intended to give off. I'm not sure if Jason wants to run a defense with the level of complexity to that degree, just because it's not traditionally what he is used to running. So I don't really like the defensive fit. I like a lot of the upside for a lot of the players. I like that he might be able to move some of them to get assets, and I like the offensive fit. I think it's pretty good. I think it could be better. But like I said, a middling fit. It's going to be a tough division without revealing who's where, and it's going to be a tough conference again without revealing who's where. So that's the main reason why I have an underdog. If you put him at a different division, he probably goes up to scrappy or maybe even fringe, depending on where he goes. But that's kind of where I have him in terms of threat level, and that's who he got, and that's the fit. So that covers Jason. And now moving on to number 28. We have Raw Dog with the Tennessee Titans, as you can see here. We have a little bit to get into with this team. To start off, I'd say like they're probably the AFC version of the Rams in terms of from a Madden perspective. They have a couple really good players, a few really good players. They're kind of on the older side. Um, they'll be able to make an impact early. They won't be complete SOB franchise 10-year players for you. They could also be trade assets, but they're locked up in contracts. The only difference with the Titans is I don't believe any of their players are locked into as big of like a cap penalty as like Cooper Kupp or Matt Stafford or Aaron Donald would be. I think those would probably hurt you worse than Derrick Henry or Kevin Byard. But yeah, I'd say like they're the AFC version of the Rams, just go from a roster perspective, like I said. But getting into the actual kind of overall outlook for Raw Dog, I'd say like being the second AFC team off the board, being the first team in the AFC South off the board, this is a tough spot to be in, because this team just isn't very talented. You have a lot of work to do. It's just rough. That's why he's an underdog. You put him in a different division with a different team, maybe, and maybe it's a better chance for him. I don't know. It's tough with everything. We'll get into that more as we have more information. But talking about this roster, obviously you have Derrick Henry, who's far and away the best player on this team from a Madden standpoint. He can change a game for you. He can control a game for you. If he utilizes him to the best of his ability, he could far exceed the threat level of underdog and probably get to a consistent playoff team. But would only be consistent for as long as Derrick Henry would be able to play at an extremely high level. So I don't really know how long that would be. Could be 3 years, 4 years. And Derrick Henry can make everyone else around him, including the defense, better because he can control the time of possession, which is a big deal. He doesn't even necessarily need a great offensive line to do so. So depending on how well he can utilize and deploy Derrick Henry, kind of is what the main factor. It's the main variable determining early success for Raw Dog, I'd say. Obviously, you have Kevin Byard as well, leading the defense. He's a really good player, arguably the best true free safety in the league. Whether he gets played at that role in Raw Dog's defense or not, I'm not really sure. Raw Dog does a really good job of, mixing multiple types of defenses and running really unique, different defenses that where he gives a look pre-snap and then he takes away a window post-snap. He gave me a lot of issues with that last year. So the way he runs his defense, I think, will mesh well with the way this defense is kind of constructed. And I think he'll use Kevin Byard to the best of his ability and create a lot of takeaways with him. So I think that's a good fit there. I think that Jeffrey Simmons will be a big player for him. I think he'll help control the run defense. He'll kind of be the anchor up front. I think Harold Landry will probably be your best pass rusher on the edge. Hopefully he hopes create some pass rush for him. Obviously, you have on the offensive end to complement Derrick Henry. You got DeAndre Hopkins. They went out and got him. That'll make the receiving corps competent, but you still have a lot of work to do there. Tough. To complement Hopkins in the receiving game, you have Treylon Burks, who's the second-year receiver, as well as Okonkwo, the tight end, who's a fast tight end that will be able to make some plays for you, just purely off his speed at the tight end position. You have an okay offensive cast to work off of. The most intriguing player to me on the offensive end is an offensive lineman, the rookie Peter Skoransky. I think as a young guard, he potentially allows you to kind of build around him and build out the offensive line. Maybe if you quickly kind of assemble a star-studded offensive line around him, then you, in the twilight years of Derrick Henry's career, you can kind of give him a superb offensive line to work off of when he's at the tail end of his prime, so that way you kind of can maximize that if that's kind of how you want to construct the team. He has a lot of different options with that. And then the biggest question and the biggest decision that Raw Dog is going to have to make is Will Levis or Malik Willis. That if you pick the Titans, you have to make that decision early, which he did pick the Titans. You have to absolutely make that decision early. If you do not make that decision early, you're letting the other player sit on the bench and he loses value every week you don't trade him. You have to decide which quarterback is your quarterback that you're going into the year with, and you have to trade him, the other one, as soon as possible and get assets for him. The quicker you get assets, the more assets or more valuable assets you'll get, and in turn, you'll be able to turn around this roster quicker or have a higher likelihood of that. But overall, I like the fit defensively. As I said, with this team and Raw Dog as a user, he's a really creative defensive user. He does some really interesting things. He understands pre-snap reads from an offensive standpoint and is able to take away windows and able to kind of come up with a lot of creative blitzes, creative zone drops. He loves a lot of hybrid defensive players. I think this defense brings some of that. I think it lacks some in certain instances, like the linebacking core or off-ball linebacking core. I think it lacks depth. I think it lacks stars at corner. So, obviously a lot to work on there. Raw Dog's a pretty quality team builder, though. He's a smart defensive user. So I think the fit is pretty good defensively. Offensively, I don't like it. Don't like the fit. I don't see him fully utilizing Derrick Henry. I think it's possible. I don't see how that fits his play style, though, necessarily. Maybe he moves Derrick Henry in the first offseason. I'm not really sure what the move is going to be there. That's a big question mark. You got a big question mark, obviously, at the quarterback position. You have DeAndre Hopkins, who's aging with no abilities. It's kind of a mess on the offensive end. It's just, I have no idea what we're gonna see here. I'm guessing a lot of turnovers until he figures out what he wants to do with his offense or gets them some talent, because they're lacking talent, they're lacking direction, they're lacking youth. It's just rough out there on the offensive end, and they lack a true quarterback. Who is going to be the quarterback? Is it going to be Malik Willis? Is it going to be Will Levis? I don't know. We're going to see. The other one needs to get moved for assets, as we said. That could change the dynamic and the outlook on this team. But that pretty much covers Raw Dog specifically as the Titans. Again, as we move forward and tackle more teams in each division, we'll come back and discuss how he looks, what his outlook is in the scope of the division and the conference. But that's him for right now. We'll move on to number 27. stacks with the Texans, as you can see. So, I mean, back-to-back AFC South teams after having previously to open the team selection draft, back-to-back NFC West teams. So, obviously, here we have the second AFC South team off the board, the Texans. I think this team, obviously, universally probably is well regarded as a team with a higher upside than the Titans. I'd say. I don't think anyone would inherently disagree with that. I think just off the bat, obviously you have Laramie Tunzel leading the offensive line unit, which can kind of pay the way to build a lot of these younger players that we'll talk about in a second. But obviously you have Laramie Tunzel, you got Shaq Mason at guard, you got Titus Howard at tackle, you got Juice Scruggs, the rookie center. So you got a really nice offensive line core there. It's going to help you kind of develop the CJ Stroud, the young quarterback, as well as some of the younger weapons. So I think just from an identity standpoint and kind of from a fit standpoint of what we seen Stacks do last year, I think this is good. On the offensive end, it's a good start. Obviously, you got Damian Pierce, who's probably the least talked about guy who's going to be a stud, I think, in this year's Madden. I think he's going to be utilized properly by Stacks. I think he's going to get the ball a lot early and often, and I think he's going to be productive. I think he's going to be a good player. Receiver to complement Damian Pierce. On the outside, you got John Mechie, Nico Collins, Tank Dell. And at tight end, you got Dak Prescott's favorite target, Dalton Schultz. So you just got a nice little receiving group of weapons there to complement Damian Pierce to help out CJ Stroud. Now, the problem with this is you don't really have a true number one receiver. So you're really going to have to rely on the offensive line to kind of protect you to build CJ Stroud. You're going to probably have to rely on the run game, set up play action to kind of create open players early on because you don't have that stud playmaker on the outside. You don't have a stud wide receiver. Your best receiving threat right now is probably Dalton Schultz. You got to develop these receivers. So that's going to be a priority for him to open the SOB season. And then on the defensive side, the only two guys really worth talking about from a long-term standpoint because this defense doesn't have a collection of veteran talent. So bringing up all the veterans or any of the veterans on the team or the defense is just not really pertinent because, quite frankly, this defense is not going to be good to open up. At least it shouldn't be unless Stacks far exceeds expectations. You have Will Anderson, obviously, who is the third overall pick, I think, in the draft. He's going to be potentially a really good player, potentially a great player for Stacks here on the defensive side. And then Derek Stingley, who is the corner they drafted last year, who's got some speed, young player still, should lead that corner core, generally speaking, for this franchise. And obviously Stroud is who we mentioned prior, and that's kind of the main reason you take the Texans. Probably, despite all the other pieces that we mentioned that are there that help the team, I think Stroud is the number one reason you take this team. His upside, his potential. Even though Madden kind of gypped him, EA kind of gypped him with the ratings, and he's not a superstar; he's only a star. I think his upside is kind of why you take the Texans. His youth is why you take the Texans. So, kind of the fit in terms of my confidence in Stack's ability to build around CJ Stroud and kind of construct a team around him. I feel pretty confident that he will do a pretty good job. Now, I do have him at underdog, but my main doubts stem from, number one, the difficulty of the AFC as a whole. So I just don't see it very likely for him to find games, especially early on when he's still constructing and developing this team, that he's going to get likely wins on. It's going to be tough. The AFC is loaded with rosters that are talented, and it's loaded with users that are good users, have proven more than Stacks has. So early on, while he's developing this team, it's going to be really tough. Realistically, potentially could bump up one or two more, based on how confident you are that he's going to build the team well enough as a whole to compete. I think the offense is going to be pretty well built. I think he's going to be able to score as he progresses. I do not have confidence in his ability to build a defense. I haven't really seen much from him in terms of that. And there's also just not a lot of pieces on the defensive side with the Texans. But obviously, number one, the AFC difficulty. Number two, the defensive doubts that we have here with Stacks, kind of where he lies at underdog. This team has upside. Um, they definitely have potential. Stacks didn't get a full SOB last year to really work off of. He really joined, I think, in the middle of the year of an already substantially shortened SOB. So it's like this is his first full year, his first full shot. He did make the playoffs last year with the Saints. I believe it was the Saints. That might have been SOB Remix. I'm not entirely sure. It might have been the Raiders that he had in regular SOB. I'm not 100% sure, but again, that speaks to how short AFC was, or rather SOB was last year because of EA and the issues that we had with that, and how little of an opportunity he had to really showcase his skill set. So I think he really could exceed this. I just don't have much to go off of. It's very similar to KJ, only the sense is he just isn't as highly touted, and he's kind of already had his opportunity and didn't do anything substantial. But it was a really small opportunity and was with not that great of a team, whatever team it was. So, I mean, he has an opportunity to prove himself. But based off the information we have him at 27 here. That's what everyone voted, and I have him an underdog personally, just because of the reasons that I mentioned prior. So, at number 26. As you can see, that would be Mitch here. We got a good amount to delve into with number 26 with the Bucks and Mitch. I think this is probably, yeah, I'd say inarguably the most talented roster to be revealed thus far. He's the second NFC South team, and hence the second fringe team. Um, so we have previously, obviously, Swag in that division, who I said, and I stand by, believe will kind of run the division early on. Mitch with his Bucks roster will have something to say about that, I believe. Um, Obviously, it all starts out with Tristan Wirfs. I think he's far and away the most valuable player in the team. He's probably the best player in the team, and he's really young still as well. So he's going to be your franchise tackle for the entire franchise. Either that, or you can move him for a ridiculous number of assets if you really want to. But I see no reason in doing that. He's going to be a lockdown anchor at left tackle for the duration of SOB. To pair with him, you obviously have Ryan Jensen in offensive line as well. So it's a good little duo there. At least Ryan Jensen will be good for a little while. I don't know how long he'll be, a top caliber center. He's going to be really good for a while, probably. But at least one phenomenal, probably arguably best offensive lineman for a franchise mode to start with, and then another, quality center, franchise center for a little bit that you're going to have. So that's a good little 1-2 punch at the offensive line to kind of, lead off with this. And just offensively, from an offensive standpoint, obviously you have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin as well, who are both older players. The way this fits with, Mitch slinging the ball, and obviously Baker Mayfield tossing it to him, at least to start off. I really do. I really love the offensive fit. I think it makes a lot of sense. He's going to sling it around. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin going to get a lot of catches. Baker Mayfield's probably going to put up a lot of gaudy numbers. Tristan Wirfs and Ryan Jensen are going to be up front protecting. I think it's going to roll. I think it's going to work well if he can control the turnovers. I think this could be a very high-powered offense early on while Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are still kind of giving you the tail end of their prime. I think also someone to watch is Trey Palmer, deep threat receiver, younger receiver. I think the Bucks picked him in the 6th round this year. He's fast, so he should be their kind of the deep threat, the quasi, take the top off the defense. Let Mike Evans and Chris Godwin kind of do their things underneath. Even though Mike Evans is a deep threat in his own right and will win probably a lot of 50-50 balls, he's a really good player too. So it's really good offensive fit. Probably on one side of the ball, the best fit that we've had thus far. It just makes a lot of sense for all the reasons that we named. And then defensively, it's a questionable fit, I think. I think it makes some sense, but I think there's just a good, considerable amount of work to do on the defensive side of the ball here with the Bucks. Obviously, you do have Levante David still for a little bit. I don't know if you want to move him or not, but if you don't, he's going to be a phenomenal player for you. He's going to complement Devin White They will complement each other perfectly, I think, for as long as Levante David is still an effective player. I don't know how long that'll be. Obviously, you have Antoine Winfield, who is going to be your star defensive player, along with Vita Vea. Vita Vea and Antoine Winfield are kind of going to be your cornerstones on defense to build off of. I think that's not bad at all to build off of. You have arguably the best pure nose tackle in the league to go along with one of the best young safeties in the league. It's a really nice duo to build off of. It isn't the best, but it is really nice. But other than that, it's just a bunch of veterans who are kind of just like going to fill spots and maybe make some plays, but they're not going to make crazy amount of plays, and they're not going to turn into superstars. You got Jamil Dean, you got Carlton Davis, you got Ryan Neal. Zion McCollum is someone to keep your eye on in the secondary. He could turn into somebody if Mitch builds him, develops him. Joe Tryon Shujinka is somebody who also could turn into someone. But I don't expect either of those players to turn into anything particularly special. They might turn into quality starters, but I don't think they're going to be any superstars or anything. Yeah, so other than that, you just kind of have a lot of like Shaq Barrett. We already mentioned Jamil Dean, Carlton Davis. These type of players where it's just like they're veteran players. They're going to make some plays. They're not going to be around there for very long. They're not going to ascend to much higher than they are now. So the defense has a lot of work that Mitch has in front of him. But already having Swag in this division with the Saints, who are probably a better fit overall than Mitch with the Bucks, I think this already kind of puts him in a tough territory. Now, I will say, off the bat, I think it's going to be this is going to be a fun division to watch. It's going to be entertaining without getting into the other two teams, the users in the division. I think that these two are probably going to be the primary candidates very early on to vie for the division lead. I think the first year or two, these are going to be your top two candidates. I think until Mike Evans and Chris Godwin kind of walk away or he moves them or whatever, however they leave the roster, I think Mitch is going to be, a high-powered offense. I think he's going to run and operate a high-powered offense. I think the defense has a lot of question marks on it, and I don't trust it with him. But that's why I kind of have him at fringe. I think the division is going to be virtually wide open, although in my mind, he and Swag kind of early on will vie for it, and then we'll see how they kind of reconstruct the losses and make up for and compensate for the losses of these veterans as we progress along here. But that pretty much covers Mitch at 26 here with the Bucks. So we'll move on to 25 here. We have number 25 is Bug with the Panthers. This is, in all likelihood, I stand by the fact that this was, thus far, that we have covered, this is the biggest steal in the draft. 25 to get the Panthers at 25 is nuts. I was legitimately considering the Panthers. I know a number of other users within the top 10 that were considering the Panthers at different points in time to legitimately take them within the top 10. So for them to drop 20 to 25 is nuts. It's a great steal by Bug. And we're going to get into the fit here and why I have him at fringe. Obviously, the third NFC South team to be revealed. So we're kind of already learning here that this division, why I've said it's going to be wide open, why all three thus far have been listed at fringe, and kind of why I've said why Swag and Mitch are going to run the division or vie for the division lead the first couple of years. But getting into this roster, obviously Brian Burns is your superstar player. That's the player on defense that makes everything go. He's going to create turnovers for you. He's a stud playmaker. He's better on defense than, in my opinion, and from a Madden standpoint at least, than anybody you're going to get on Tampa Bay, anybody you're going to get on New Orleans. So he's got the best defensive player in the division thus far, the best playmaker in the division on defense so far. And that's big for a guy like Bug, who traditionally doesn't blitz a ton, plays a lot of man, likes to play like really tight man coverage, likes fast corners, and just match you up and just rush with 3 or 4 and get after you with these cover 1, cover 2 shell defenses. And I think Brian Burns is the perfect player for that scheme. as well as Derek Brown to complement him on the inside. He'll be giving an inside rush to complement Brian Burns, so that's good. Shaq Thompson's a good veteran linebacker to line up with these running backs, with these tight ends and man coverage. Should stick pretty well with him because Bug loves his man coverage and is probably going to find a way to operate it at a pretty considerably quality level. And then you get into these corners in the secondary room. You got J.C. Horn spearheading him, obviously. J.C. Horn's going to be a stud for Bug. That's a match made in heaven. Jeremy Chinn's the safety. Von Bell, that's a safety duo. I think Jeremy Chinn's probably going to be better for longer. Von Bell's kind of a stopgap there. I think Bug will probably find someone else to fill that role, especially since Von Bell's not, he probably will play the robber role in a lot of the cover one robber defenses. He probably will come down in the box a lot. They'll probably have him more in these these 10-yard hook zones rather than these deep zones or anything like that. If anything, maybe like a curl zone, things like of that nature that are shorter routes because that kind of plays to his strengths. And I think he'll help with defending the run. Obviously, you have Dante Jackson and C.J. Henderson as well as other corners. That trio of corners for Bug is a great fit. Like that's a phenomenal fit. J.C. Horn, Dante Jackson, and C.J. Henderson, all fast, relatively young corners that can man up, play one-on-one. And then you got Brian Burns, Derek Brown rushing on the inside. You got Shaq Thompson in the second level kind of calling the shots at linebacker. It's going to be a really interesting defense to watch. It's going to be tough probably for a lot of guys to beat, especially since he's getting a lot of NFC teams. A lot of the NFC teams don't have a ton of weapons, at least to start off. So it's going to be, early on, might have a top 5 defense. And then if this progresses, it really could get better. This defense is going to be dangerous. But where all the questions come from and why Bug isn't severely favored to win this division is the offense. And it's a bad fit, I think. I don't think it fits well. And I think that it could be the downfall of this team. And the only reason that they're really listed fringe. Now they do have Ekem Ekwonu, I think his name is, the tackle, who's a superstar. That's a great player for Bug. Now, Bug, in my mind, if I recall correctly, likes to make moves for these big, linemen that like make plays like this. So like these superstar linemen. So that's a good start on the line. And obviously to complement him, you have Austin Corbett, the guard. So you have a good little start there with the offensive line, but the rest of it has to be constructed out. It's mediocre at best, but it's really below average. And then receivers, you got DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault, Jonathan Mingo, where it's just like none of these guys are stud playmakers that are going to make plays for Bug. Now, Chark will stretch the field. Shenault will make some tough contested catches, but it's going to be overall difficult for Bug to succeed with this offense, I think, early on. And then, of course, the guy on your right, the right of your screen, Bryce Young, I don't have confidence in Bug's ability to develop him as a pure passer. To get Bryce Young to a game manager, I am confident that he will get him to that. I think he'll be a quality game manager for the duration of his career if that's what he decides to do, is keep him. But I think the reality is that you don't want to have a quarterback like Bryce Young, who's starting off with superstar development, who's starting off as young as he is, who's starting off with the ceiling that he could reach. You don't want him to be a game manager, and you're not going to pay him to be a game manager. You're not going to pay him $100-something million to be a game manager. So maybe the smartest thing for Buggy to do would be to move Bryce Young, get a substantial amount of assets from whoever is going to pay that bounty for Bryce Young, and just kind of reconstruct your offense in a way that best suits you. Run the ball, manage the clock, play shortened possessions, play your man defense. Keep the score in the teens, or low 20s, and win a lot of football games that way. Now, Bryce Young can still help you do that, and I'm not saying he has to trade him. I'm just saying from a standpoint of maximizing your team and what you have. I just don't think Bryce Young and Brandon and Bug's play style with mesh. I don't think they mesh very well. And I think that maybe that's something he should consider. So love the defensive fit overall. Do not like the offensive fit, how it starts off. It has some pieces there. They have obviously Chuba Hubbard as well, Ian Thomas, players like this where it's like Could he make some plays? Yeah, I just don't love it. Bug isn't known for an offensive user necessarily anyway, so I don't think it's going to hurt him like and just derail anything. I just think that is, if you're looking at why it's fringe, that's why it kind of counterbalances the defensive positivity and upside. But overall, that's kind of what he's looking at from his team standpoint. I think that he's probably going to take a while to get started and to make some playoff runs. I think in that division because the aforementioned Mitch with the Bucks and Swag with the Saints. I think they're just better positioned fit wise as well as overall team wise to just make early runs with those veterans until those veterans get older and they have to kind of replace them. And then I think Mitch's time will kind of come with the final user who obviously have the Falcons. I think they'll both vie for like at least the middle portion, and I think the latter portion, the final third of SOB, if you want to split it into thirds, will be anyone's up for grabs at that point. But yeah, that's from a division standpoint. We'll kind of encapsulate everything when we get to the final user, the Falcons user of this division. But for now, that's kind of what that looks like. So we'll move on to number 24 now after covering that. Number 24, we got Ricks. This is the first person or first user that we have listed as Scrappy. He does have the Packers. I think this is a really interesting overall choice for Ricks. I think this is the best. I said Mitch was the best one side team fit. I said previously Swag was the best overall team fit, and now I say this. Now that this is revealed, is the best overall team fit. This is a really good team fit for Ricks. This kind of fits everything that he wants to do. It's just missing some stuff, but all the pieces are there. From a defensive standpoint, you have Jair Alexander, obviously. He's a lockdown, shutdown corner. Can do whatever Ricks needs him to do. You have Rashawn Gary and Lucas Van Ness, who they just drafted. So you got your edge defenders there. You're fast, athletic, stud potential edge defenders that Ricks loves to use. You have Kenny Clark on the inside, so you got your run stopper who can also rush the passer. So you have that as well. You have Eric Stokes, who was recently the first round pick from last season to complement Jair Alexander. Bigger corner, cover the bigger receivers. He's still fast, got speed as well. Excuse me. You have Darnell Savage on the back end as a true free safety for you. So you got a lot of moving defensive pieces that I think Ricks will utilize very well. He's going to get some interesting blitz packages with these players. I think he's going to really challenge offenses to pick up these blitzes, especially within the confines of his own division, which, is obviously, you look at the offensive lines, other than the Lions team from a roster standpoint, it's going to challenge the Vikings and the Bears, respectively. With a lot of these blitz packages because of the lack of offensive line talent, I think, and probably even the Lions. But the Lions are, a team that have a good offensive line, and we'll get to that user when we get to them. But within the confines of his own division, I think, Scrappy, you could make a real case that's a legitimate underrating of Ricks with this team fit, and I think that's fair if you're on that end. The only reason I'm on the lower end is just the overall scope of the conference and the NFC as a whole. I think it's going to be hard for him to consistently grab a playoff spot, but I do think he's going to consistently play almost everybody tough, and I think he's going to pull off upsets. And I still think he's going to make some playoff appearances and make maybe some playoff runs. I think he's probably the best rated user we have in Scrappy, probably. If you're considering the team, or at the very least, he has the best opportunities or will have the best opportunities to make legitimate runs as a quote-unquote Scrappy threat level user. But, now from the offensive standpoint, you obviously have David Bakhtiari, kind of being the best player for you, and you have Elton Jenkins as well. So you have a good little offensive line to build off of there. And then when you talk about the weapons, this is another really good part of the fit. Is the offensive line's got some pieces, and then you have the 1-2 punch of Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon, which I think kind of fits Ricks perfectly. Like Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon as a 1-2 punch is just like chef's kiss for the fit there with Ricks and the way he runs the football, the way he utilizes running backs in different ways to their skill sets. I think it's just a really good fit. I think Christian Watson as a number one receiver is, again, another great fit. I don't think Ricks is going to toss the ball all over the yard, but when he does pass the ball, he likes to hone in on one really good receiver. I think Christian Watson has easily the potential to be that guy and more. And then you got Romeo Dobbs to complement him. You got Jaden Reed to complement him. So you got a good little receiving core that's not going to be expensive because they're not great players. Unless he develops into that, which is possible but unlikely, in my opinion. But you got players that can complement your number one receiver and your run game. And then the biggest question mark for a lot of teams is the quarterback, and that remains true with Rick's here with Jordan Love because it's in a weird. He's in a weird spot where Jordan Love is technically, potentially going to have a breakout season in real life, right? But because he's older in Madden, it's just not necessarily the way it works, right? Like, so it's in a tough spot where do you try to develop him and keep him and then pay him maybe a little bit of money to stay? Do you move on from him and try to, get another quarterback? That's the biggest question mark with the Packers team. But other than that, the fit is phenomenal. I give him a shot in this division for sure. I think the scrappy, like I said, is the scope more so of the NFC as a conference, not the division. I give him a shot in the division. I give him a good shot. He's not the favorite in my mind. I don't even know necessarily if he'd be the favorite I picked to finish last in the division either. I think he's somewhere in the middle. And I think that he could very well exceed this ranking and the threat level that we have for him. But we'll move on to number 23 now with the Las Vegas Raiders. We have Kuzo here, and we have another threat level underdog. We're kind of flipping it back here. Now, this kind of is a good, to get into a conference discussion here without revealing too much. This is kind of a good way to kind of read the conference difference here because you have 24. You see Ricks, he's kind of scrappy. He's scrappy, which is the rank above underdog. And then you have underdog here, Kuzo, who's ahead of Ricks. Now, this could be just my opinion on the users themselves. It could be the fit, and it could be the conference. It's kind of all three, but the main thing here is the conference because the AFC, if you're talking about Kuzo's ability to make the playoffs on a consistent basis, it's slim to none. It's going to be really loaded. We're going to get more into that discussion as we move forward, but it's going to be really tough. Talking about team fits, this may not make any sense. This does not make much sense in terms of team fit for Kuzo. This is probably one of the worst, if not the worst, team fits thus far. Just because it just doesn't mesh that well in my mind. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, you could very well prove me wrong, so I'm not saying this is the end-all, be-all, or the truth necessarily. I mean, obviously, you look here at this roster, you got Devontae Adams, right? So he's got his one receiver that it's going to convert, his third and longs for him. You got Josh Jacobs. You got your bell cow, right? But other than Colt Miller, you got no one to really create holes or block for you. So your offensive line's a big question mark. Receivers to complement Adams. Darren Waller's gone. He's in New York or New Jersey, whatever. So you have no one to complement Adams. So if someone decides, hey, I'm going to double Adams on 3rd and 8, because Kuzo traditionally has a lot of these plays that he goes to on 3rd and longs, where it's like a lot of the same handful of plays. And Adams probably will be the focal point of those plays, and rightfully so. But people are going to catch on to that, double Adams, triple Adams, whatever they need to do. And then is he going to have a counterpunch with another player? He doesn't right now, in my mind. So that's kind of a problem. You don't have a complement to Adams in the receiving game. You don't have really that many good offensive linemen. And Jimmy Garoppolo, look, that's fine for Kuzo. It's probably, it makes sense. If he had a better offensive line, receiving core around him, I think it'd be potentially really good. But look, obviously no one wants Jimmy Garoppolo as your ideal starter. But as a bridge quarterback, it works. He's not necessarily the problem or why I don't see this team as a fit. Moving on to the defense, you just don't really have much of anything. You have Max Crosby, yes. You have old Chandler Jones who can rush for a yes. And you have Tyree Wilson. They're one of their top draft picks, if not their top draft pick. So you have some pass rushers, but other than that, you don't really have very much. You're not going to be able to play man like Kuzo likes to play. He likes to play a lot of two shell, two man. You're not really going to be able to do that. Like not successfully, not with this team, not right now. Um, so the fit doesn't make sense defensively. You're lacking a lot of defensive pieces, which ball control and defense is kind of how Kuzo, uh, you know, earns his living with his teams traditionally. So without that, it's going to be tough, especially in an AFC that is going to be deep. It's going to be a deep, talented AFC. So that's why I have him at underdog. We'll get more into the division and conference discussion again as we reveal more people. But for right now, that's where we have him as a threat level underdog. That's kind of why we have him there. So getting on to number 22. We have the Washington Commanders, and it will be Novocaine who has them. And we get back to Scrappy here. This is the first NFC East team off the board. Obviously, we have three more to go after this. But there's a lot to talk about with this team. There's a lot to talk about with Novocaine. Now, I don't really know how to break this down super well. I'm not super familiar with Novocaine's play style. This is the biggest, other than KJ with the Cardinals, I think this is the largest question mark with, how do I, anticipate scheme fit with user and how does that mesh? I'm not really entirely sure. But getting into like the roster talent, just purely from that standpoint, you have a phenomenal defensive line. You have Jonathan Allen, you have Darren Payne, you have Montez Sweat, and you have Chase Young, assuming the Commanders don't trade him in real life prior to the start of SOB. So you have something to work off of defensively right there. I think they're going to create plays automatically off the bat. I think from an offensive standpoint, or rather to get to the back end of the defense, first you have Kendall Fuller, you have Cameron Curl, and Derek Forrest, who are going to be a good safety duo. And you have Emmanuel Forbes to complement Kendall Fuller, who you can develop and kind of move along with Kendall Fuller. So you have an overall pretty solid defense. Like, they're going to make plays for you. They're going to create turnovers, probably. If you can keep games close, this defense can win you games. Now, again, I don't really know Novocaine's play style well enough to break down the fit and say how it may or may not benefit him, but I don't see how you almost don't succeed with this Washington defense, regardless of scheme. Now, I guess if you rely on your linebackers a large amount, then their linebackers aren't the strongest. So if you're playing a lot of cover 2, Tampa 2, cover 4, I guess you'd be relying on safeties and corners. So if you're relying on, Tampa 2, cover 6, a lot of linebacker heavy, maybe 3-4, 4-3 type of base formations where you're 3-3-5, where you're just putting a lot of linebackers out there and that's kind of your scheme, then you could struggle at that point. But other than that, like if you're just playing, if you like to play nickel defenses, 4-man rush, 4-2s, anything, dollar defenses, then I think you're going to succeed. This defense has great defensive line, really good potential with the secondary. So I think the defense is going to be good regardless. Now getting to the offense, you have a lot more questions. The offensive line's a big question mark. The running backs are kind of a question mark. You got receivers. Now, that's the one thing. You have a really good receiving trio, and I think that's what the positive is to work off of from an offensive standpoint. I think you have Terry McLaurin, obviously, leading that unit. You have Curtis Samuel. You have Jahan Dotson, all there. It's a really good receiving trio. It's kind of underrated. And then you have Sam Howell, who's, a big question mark. But I think overall, Novocaine's a big question mark. I can't get into play style and tendencies, anything of that nature, because I just don't know enough to really speak with a definitive level of confidence on how he's going to, do with the fit. But I think defensively, regardless, he's probably going to succeed. Offensively, he's got some work to do. It's kind of the bottom line there. We'll get more into his fit into the NFC East and the NFC as a whole as we progress. So moving on to 21. We have Caddenbross with the Denver Broncos. Flipping back to the AFC, I think this is our first scrappy in the AFC. It's for a lot of reasons that we'll get into here. So First off, obviously he's the second team listed in the AFC West, so he's got someone who's perceivably lower than him in the AFC West. That being the Las Vegas Raiders and being Kuzo. Now, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I say the Raiders are probably a worse team in Madden terms. So he already kind of has an advantage there in that sense. And then obviously, I think that uh, I think that he's a better user slightly, probably off the top of my head. And breaking down into like the roster, I'd say like Pat Surtain obviously is the guy you have to mention first. He's super young and going to be a stud the whole franchise, and arguably the best corner in the league in SOB, in real life, whatever. So like that's already a better player from a franchise building standpoint than the Raiders and maybe anyone else has had prior to this point. I can't think off the top of my head. Maybe him and Tristan Wirfs are right up there, depending on how you like to construct your teams. But I think most people would take Pat Surtain, and that's a really good way to start. So you obviously have Justin Simmons to complement him. You have Demarin Mathis, and you have the other rookie corner, Riley Moss, I think his name is. So you have a lot of talent in the secondary there to kind of work off of. From my experience, Cat and Rush runs a lot of like vanilla zone defenses. So it's like if you have a really good secondary, I think they'll run that effectively. So it'll help you. Now, obviously, you want some pass rush to complement that, and maybe that's kind of where they're kind of struggling a little bit. So I think maybe on the defensive end, he has some work to do, but you have part of the fit. So it's a decent fit defensively. It's not a great fit. And then offensively, you get into like the receiving trio of Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, and then you even throw KJ Hamler in there. So I guess four guys who can really be quality Madden receivers. And the way he likes to sling the ball around, the way he likes to move the ball, he's been smarter recently, at least more recently with the ball. So with Russell Wilson, with those receivers, he could make some legitimate noise. And then, of course, you kind of have this underrated offensive line that isn't talked about enough with Ben Powers, Garrett Bowles, Mike McGlinchey, and Quinn Menierez. You have a really quality offensive line unit there. And then obviously you have wide receivers to throw to as well. So I think the offensive fit is good. I think it's a good offensive fit and a decent defensive fit. So overall, it's a pretty good fit. And he's probably going to fare better, at least early on, than Kuza, depending on team building and things of that nature. So that's kind of why we have him at Scrappy, because he's already kind of like, the third guy in his division. He's got a better team. He's got a better fit off the bat. So this is kind of what we're looking at with him thus far. And we'll continue on here with number 20. You got the last member of the NFC South, which would be Hat himself. And that rounds out our first division with the NFC South. You got, obviously, Swag had the Saints. You had Bug with the Panthers. You have Mitch with the Bucks. And now you have Hat with the Falcons. And this is potentially the most interesting of all the members of the NFC South here. Like, just in terms of a fit standpoint, in terms of what he's going to do standpoint, is really interesting. This whole NFC South division is really interesting. But it's wrapped up at number 20, which is like a lot of divisions, not a lot of divisions, but a few divisions have not even begun yet. And you have the NFC South wrapping up. Like, this is the last member. So we can get into real division discussion in a second after we break down the Falcons as a whole. From an offensive line standpoint, to start with the offense here from Hat, since we ended with the offensive line last time with Denver, you obviously have Chris Lindstrom, you have Jake Matthews, and you have Caleb McGarry to kind of build off of. Chris Lindstrom's kind of the main guy there. They all go as he goes. That's going to be a good foundation for Hat to work off of from the offensive line. So that's a good start. Obviously you see. You look at the weapons, and you at least have Kyle Pitts. You obviously have that stud Bijan Robinson, who's going to have superstar development, and you got Drake London. So you got a good little trio to work off of there on an offensive standpoint. And then you have Ritter, pulling the trigger there with at quarterback for all those guys. Um, I think this offense could be really good with Hat. Like it could be really good. It could also be really bad. Like this might have the most fluctuation from an early perspective than any other unit or side of the ball that we've talked about thus far. Because this could really be a top 10 unit, but it also could be a bottom 10 unit on the offensive side of the ball for Hat. And where that kind of lands on the spectrum is going to kind of determine how his early season goes, I think, or his early seasons go. I think from a defensive standpoint, he has some work to do, even if he does a good job building this team. He obviously has Jesse Bates and AJ Terrell to work off from the secondary. And then he has Grady Jarrett and Calais Campbell to kind of anchor as veterans in the defensive line. You kind of got to build out the defensive line to fill those gaps when Calais Campbell and Grady Jarrett inevitably regress and or retire. And you kind of have to build out the secondary to complement Jesse Bates and AJ Terrell. Those are kind of your foundational defensive pieces. And then you kind of got to build up the whole linebacking core. So it's just a lot of work to do on the defensive side of the ball, which is why I've kind of spoken previously about how I think Swag and Mitchell kind of vie for the division early. I think Bug and Hat have a lot more early work and heavy lifting to do. But I think like long term, they have a lot of like more quality pieces, and I think that they'll make noise in the second third of the franchise. Like I said, I think it'll be kind of their division to vie for in the second third. And now Hat could obviously prove me wrong here and vie early for the division lead, but I'm not 100% convinced of that right now because of Desmond Ridder, the question marks there, because of the questions on the defensive side of the ball all over. And then because of, the lack of diversity of weapons, we'll say. I mean, they have Drake London, so they have a receiver. They have Kyle Pitts, who's an excellent, probably the best tight end you would want on a franchise mode for Madden. And then they have Bijan Robinson. But you don't have any compliments at receiver. You don't have any compliments really at running back. You do have Cordell Patterson, so I'll stand corrected at that. But you don't really have any tight ends or receivers other than Drake London and Kyle Pitts that you really want to rely on. So you just have a lot to work on with the Falcons, and that's the only reason, like I said, that I am doubting Hat early on. But overall, this division is going to be fun to watch in general. You got Mitch with the Bucks, you got Bug with the Panthers, you got Hat with the Falcons, and you have Swag with the Saints. So it's a really good group of four there. It should be interesting to watch that division year in and year out. It's going to be fun. And I think they'll all compete year in and year out for that top spot. But we'll move on to 19, and we'll take another look at the NFC South at the end, and we'll kind of break down all the divisions a little bit. But we'll move on to 19 before that. And we cover the third, or rather the second member of the NFC North here, and the second user overall with the playoffs moniker and the threat level, Jasique with the Detroit Lions. Obviously, the first being KJ with the Cardinals, and we already discussed why that is. But the second user overall with the playoffs moniker, and the second user to be revealed in the NFC North. The Lions, I think, we talked about the Panthers, how they fell to 25. I think the Lions falling to 19 is a comparable steal. I think the Panthers is probably still better because you're getting them at 25, and I think they're a pretty comparable team to the Lions. So I think this is probably the second best steal of the team draft thus far, behind Bug with the Panthers. But still a steal nonetheless. And overall, I love this team fit. Like, we'll break it down and explain why. But this team fit is phenomenal, and the team fit is the number one reason why I have this user, Jasique, listed as a playoff level threat with this team, because this fit just makes sense. You start with the offensive line, because we've been doing that. Might as well keep it a trend here. We got Frank Ragnow as the center, as you can see to the left. You got Penei Sewell, franchise tackle. You can move him left or right, wherever you want. Taylor Decker, play the opposite side. You got Jonah Jackson and Glasgow in the interiors. So you got a nice offensive line to round out. Probably a top 5 offensive line in the league. Really nice pieces there. Some veteran pieces, some young pieces. Top 5 center in Ragnow. So just a nice offensive line to kind of start off the conversation. Then you would talk about the weapons a little bit, right? We're just going to highlight the main guys, right? We'll talk about Monra, St. Brown, as you see to your right. Is going to be a stud slot receiver for him. If he doesn't feel like he fits with him, which I think he'll figure out how to utilize him in the slot. But if he doesn't feel like he does fit with him, I'm sure somebody will pay something for him where he can compensate for the loss and kind of get another receiver that he feels like will better fit. You got Jameson Williams, who's going to take the top off the defense. You got Marvin Jones, who's going to be your jump ball receiver. So you got a lot of different skill sets from the receiver position, and it's going to be a really interesting way to see like how he utilizes them, how he deploys them. And then of course you got the rookie running back Jameer Gibbs, and you got David Montgomery to complement him. So you just have a ton of weapons, huge diverse skill set with you got receivers, the running backs, the offensive line, and then you have Goff distributing the ball, which I think is a good quarterback for him. Now, obviously, this would be hands down the best team fit thus far of the draft if he had a great quarterback, but Goff is a good quarterback. So I still love the fit overall, but Goff is like not quite as good as you would want for Jasik, or else he could even be in the contender tier, to be quite frank, if he had gotten like a quarterback of the level of like a Joe Burrow or a Josh Allen, or even a tier lower with like a Dak Prescott. You could even argue like, oh, if he has Dak, he might be in the contender tier. I wouldn't, disagree with that necessarily. And then on the defensive side, you do have a good amount of work to do. But I think this offense is so good and this fit is so good offensively that it's going to compensate for any deficiencies defensively. But at the very least, you have Aiden Hutchinson and Jack Campbell to kind of work off of. A pass rusher / run stopper defensive lineman, and Jack Campbell, the rookie linebacker, to kind of work off of, as well as Brian Branch as a safety position, to kind of like build off of and start off with the defense. But I think realistically, I think this offensive fit is so good, like I said, it will compensate for any defensive deficiencies, at least early on. And then if he doesn't build out the defense as the franchise progresses, then it can start to be a problem. But right now, to start off, I think this is a great fit. Jasik's never been known for like a defensive user anyways. So it's not like he needs a great defense to succeed. He's had plenty of great playoff runs with some mediocre to below average defenses. It's kind of what the Lions represent talent-wise in SOB to start off. And that's kind of what he has. So that's why I'm at playoff threat. And we'll get more to kind of the NFC North discussion as we move along. But comparing him to Rick's, like, I'd say those two fits are some of the two of the best fits, if not the two best fits thus far. So it's going to be really interesting to see how those two different styles match up against each other. And we mentioned how kind of his blitz packages and things of that nature would give problems to the Vikings user, the Bears user, but maybe not the Lions user. And it's a lot because Jasik is a good passer. He's a good passer. He's got good weapons on this team. He's got a good offensive line. So just all those reasons, it's going to be interesting to see those two match up, and then we'll break down the division more. Moving on to number 18 here, we have Pep as the Vikings here. So to overline this roster or give an overview of this roster without getting into it yet, the main reason I'd say I have the Vikings as a threat level of fringe as opposed to the Lions and Jasik with playoff level threat is the roster talent. And we talk about the Vikings, and of course they have Justin Jefferson, who's arguably the best receiver in the league. A lot of people would say that. In Madden, he's probably the most valuable wide receiver that you could possibly have to start off a franchise. And of course, he's a superstar player, phenomenal. He's going to make plays for you. He's going to, be your offense, really, or the whole franchise if you want. But the Lions as a whole are just a more complete football team, and just especially deeper on the offensive side of the ball than the Lions are. So it just gives them kind of that advantage and that little edge there. And them being so closely ranked to each other kind of gives the edge to Jasik in terms of like the threat level, in my opinion. I think the Vikings need a little bit more work than the Lions, and we'll delve into the roster and why that is in a second here. Obviously, we already mentioned Justin Jefferson. Other weapons that you kind of have to complement him on the offensive side of the ball. TJ Hawkinson is going to be a good tight end for you for a while there. KJ Osborne is going to be a good complementary piece, and then Jordan Addison's kind of the rookie receiver that you want to develop and become, get him to become a number two receiver behind Justin Jefferson. On the defensive side of the ball, it's kind of like led by Harrison Smith, Byron Murphy are kind of the key guys in the back end. Harrison Smith's kind of just not going to be good for very long, so that's kind of the problem with him. Byron Murphy's not even really a star player, so it's like you're just getting a solid corner. Those are your back end top players right there. And then you talk about edge, you got Danielle Hunter and Marcus Davenport. It's like, yeah, Danielle Hunter's really good, but Marcus Davenport is a fine number two. He's not terrible, he's not great. And then you got a good tackle duo in Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw on the offensive side of the ball. They'll be able to protect. They'll be able to create, good outside zone lanes. But this team just lacks so much. I mean, you have Kirk Cousins, obviously, as well. It's a pretty good quarterback to start off. It's fine, not good, not great. But this team's lacking depth and star power in a lot of different places. You look at running back, and Dalvin Cook's gone, and you got Alexander Madison filling the role. You look at interior offensive line with the guards in the center, and it's just lacking real strength and power and pass protection there. You look at interior of the defensive line, they don't really have any impact players there. You look at linebacking core, Eric Kendricks isn't there anymore, obviously, so you have no one in the second level. You look at replacements for Harrison Smith and another safety, and those are spots that are kind of vacant or just not filled by players that are going to make splash plays. And then the corners are just not very good. So you just have so many things that you have to fill. Now, the thing is, you're not going to find someone as good as Justin Jefferson on very many teams, if any other team, in terms of just a pure playmaker. So you're getting that top end talent, but you're not filling the depth. It's going to take him a little bit longer, I think, to build out that team and to really make a full impact on everything. So that's kind of why he is where he is in terms of threat level. I look at the NFC North as a whole, without having the Bears user, obviously, as of right now. It's pretty interesting. I think three pretty evenly matched users. And I think the fit's pretty good here for Pep. I think he's going to have to build it out regardless. Any user would have kind of build this out. So it's a fine fit, but he has a lot of work to do. It definitely could have been worse fit-wise, but you got some good stuff to work off of. But in terms of the rest of the division, Bricks with the Packers, Pep now with the Vikings, Jasik with the Lions, those are all pretty good fits. Obviously, we talked about Ricks and Jasik being very great fits, and Pep's a fine fit. But it's all pretty evenly matched there thus far. So, we'll see how that kind of unfolds when we finally tackle the NFC North as a whole. But right now, it's interesting. But we'll move on to 17 now. And we have Jay Scruggs picking the Jaguars, and we also have him at fringe now. To be honest, he's only fringe because of the high degree of difficulty of the AFC, or at least the perceived high degree of difficulty of the AFC. We don't even know for sure if it's going to be necessarily difficult, but the way I see it is going to be very difficult. You start off with the offense, and right off the bat, I think it's a good fit for this user with this team, right? I think, they have balance, they have weapons, and they have a franchise quarterback. You got weapons on weapons. They probably have the most depth, arguably, of almost any team in the league in terms of just what weapons to lean on and to go to. You got Christian Kirk, you got Calvin Ridley, you got Evan Ingram, you got Travis Etienne. You got Zay Jones, you got Jamal Agnew, just different guys that you can use in different types of ways. So it's just really useful in that sense. And then obviously you have Trevor Lawrence distributing the ball to them, who already starts off with superstar. He's a young quarterback. He's a franchise quarterback. He can move. He has a strong arm. So it's just you have a bunch of assets on the offensive side of the ball. That's not even mentioning Brandon Scherf and Cam Robinson, who are pretty good offensive line pieces. You do have to build that out a little bit, and the offense isn't necessarily having to that's the guy. You point to that guy and you say, that's the guy you need to stop. It doesn't have that guy quite yet, but, Trevor Lawrence can kind of account for that, or rather compensate for the lack of that with, his elite play, potentially. And you can kind of develop that guy in time. And then you flip over to the defensive side of the ball. You got Josh Allen rushing the passer with Trevon Walker and Devon Hamilton stopping the run inside. In the backside, you got Tyson Campbell, Andre Cisco, and Chris Claybrooks kind of as the main pieces in the back end there. And then in the middle, you got Faseda Lukalon and Devin Lloyd, who are pretty good linebackers. So overall, this team's pretty well filled out. Obviously, the other two AFC South teams have been named so far were in the back end of the draft and are obviously Raw Dog with the Titans and Stacks with the Texans. Now, I don't give Scruggs a huge advantage over them, but obviously with a better roster, say a considerably better roster, and like a little more, a slight more amount of recent success, like recently, I give him a good edge, a decent edge over them, but not considerable. It's not definitive. Right now, like as it stands right now, without knowing the Colts user, this division's kind of up in the air, if you ask me. But I do give the edge to Scruggs as of right now if we're talking about the AFC South. So it's three AFC South teams named. Um, Overall, I just think this is a good team. I think this is a good fit, especially offensively. I think Trevor Lawrence is, in the offense as a whole, is going to thrive under Scruggs. I think the defense is going to kind of work itself out. They got some young pieces. I think he's going to kind of build on that. They have a lot more like foundational potential superstars here than almost anywhere else that we've tackled thus far. And they're a really interesting team. Trevor Lawrence obviously has a few more years of his rookie deal. So just a lot of interesting things to take account of while we move into number 16. We have Rondo with the Chargers, running it back with the Chargers because if you remember last year, I believe he was the Chargers in SOB. And it all starts here with Justin Herbert. Obviously, this is the first probably like just kind of considerably elite quarterback that we have. I mean, you could say Trevor Lawrence. I guess depends on what your perception is. But within the confines of Madden and this franchise, it's probably Justin Herbert. It's probably the first guy that's just like kind of screams out at you. It's just like that's the guy. He's gonna lift his team up above where they would be without him, obviously, or with a normal quarterback. So like having Herbert and then having these weapons around him. You have Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Gerald Everett and Quentin Johnson, a newly acquired first round wide receiver. It's going to be a really good offense. You got Corey Linsley blocking, you got Rashawn Slater blocking, you got Zion Johnson blocking. So you just got a really good offense as a whole. And Rondo's a good user. He usually has diverse play calling. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to build a team. He knows how to maintain his good players, and everything like that. So the offense is going to be rolling. I think that's going to be good for sure. And we'll get into the defense as well with, obviously you got Bosa and Mac on the edge, Mac for the time being at least, right? And then you got Kendricks and Kenneth Murray kind of at linebacker, and the main pieces in the back end are Derwin James and Asante Samuel Jr., obviously. So you have a really good kind of core for defense. So this is easily, hands down, the best roster that has been listed off thus far. Like, this roster is clearly the best. Now, there are downsides, right? Their downsides are just purely from a roster standpoint right now. It's really just like kind of filling out the offensive line, right? Which is not a considerable weakness per se. It's just not a considerable strength. Interior defensive line. And filling out the secondary completely, right? So it's like minor weaknesses. Really, this roster is kind of completely filled out, and they would be a Super Bowl contender, but I'm going to tell you why they're not and why Rondo will not be. And it's because he has shown that he has clear limitations and has displayed clear limitations throughout the duration of his time in SOB, has kind of shown that he has a clear ceiling. He has not surpassed that. He had this Chargers team last year, didn't break past the ceiling. He only 3 seasons, albeit. He's had other great teams in the past, or other good teams at least, and has not broken past the ceiling. So I have him at playoffs because I don't see him as a true contender because he has never really proven himself to be a true contender. And that's just been the reality of it throughout this duration of time in SOB. On top of that, they're like double-digit millions of dollars in the hole. So maintaining players, acquiring new players, all of the above is going to be extremely difficult for Rondo. So that's going to make it really difficult for him to team build. It's going to make it difficult for him to maintain this really well built roster, and he's going to have a limited window of time to try to succeed and win football games. So if he doesn't succeed early on, he's going to start losing players. It's going to get harder in an already stacked conference. So that's my reasoning with Rondo. If you look at the rest of the division thus far, you obviously have Kattenbross with the Broncos, and you have Kuzo with the Raiders. So it's like he's the best user with the best team in this division that we know of thus far, hands down. But again, it doesn't put him as a contender within the AFC. Getting into number 15, we have the 49ers here. Peoples, we have the first user listed as a contender level threat here. Obviously, that has a lot of reasons behind it. The number one reason is the 49ers are a top roster, and the number two reason is Peoples is and I mean, honestly, he's not the number 15 user. He should have been higher, in my opinion. And he has a good pedigree, so you're giving him probably one of the best, if not the best roster he started with. In a relatively speaking, conference where he's going to have better opportunities to make runs at the Super Bowl. So, but talk about biggest steals of the draft team wise. This probably takes the cake. This and another pick that's about to come up in a few picks or within the next few picks will take the cake for biggest steals in the draft, in my opinion. But now getting into the roster, Joey Bosa, obviously we'll start with in the defensive line, or rather Nick Bosa. Joey Bosa is his brother. We just talked about him with the Chargers, but Nick Bosa with the 49ers is going to be the superstar of that defensive line, create big splash plays, create turnovers, create strip sacks, be the best player on that defense. You also have Javon Hargrave, who they got from Philadelphia, complimenting him. Arik Armstead complimenting him. Both in the inside, interior rushers, pushing the pocket, getting into the quarterback's face, forcing quarterbacks outside to Bosa and to Drake Jackson, the second-round pick I think they had, defensive end, who's going to be a good piece for Peoples as well. Talk about the rest of the defense. You probably have the best linebacking duo in the league in Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw. That's really going to anchor this defense down, make it really tough. Allow them to play like good zone defense. Probably will be the best zone defense in the league the first couple years, I would imagine. Then you have Chidavarius Ward on the back end, along with Hufanga, the All-Pro safety from last year, are kind of like the highlights of the back end, anchoring the defense in the back. And then you move to the offense, and you got weapons on weapons on weapons. You got Christian McCaffrey, you got George Kittle, you got Deebo Samuel, you got Brandon Ayuk, and you got Kyle Juszczyk, even the fullback. Like, you have so many weapons, so many options to use that the offense, just weapons alone, is just talent galore. And we're not even delving to the deep parts of this roster where there are likely other gems that Peoples will covet and develop here. And obviously, it's not even mentioning the guy to your left, Trent Williams, who's going to be a stud for at least a year or two before retiring. He's going to be probably the best offensive lineman in the game until he retires. And then you get into the probably the most crucial, critical aspect of this whole team. Really, the only reason I imagine why they fell was the quarterback situation, right? You have Brock Purdy, you have Trey Lance, you have Sam Darnold. From a Madden standpoint, you're probably not going to go Sam Darnold, so it's really between Trey Lance and Brock Purdy. Trey Lance is the better traditional option from a Madden standpoint. So, I mean, he's probably the direction that Peoples will go. But it's possible he likes Purdy better, and then he moves Lance. So we'll see with that. But ultimately, this is a loaded roster with a really good user. How could this not be a good fit? It just checks every box. Yes, they're not a perfect roster. No one is a perfect roster in the first year. But it's a great roster, a good user, and they will be Super Bowl contenders the first year and probably beyond. I see them. He's probably going to make at least a Super Bowl, I would imagine. Maybe even more than one. He might even get his first ring this year. The 49ers are that good. Peoples as a user is that good. And the NFC is, relatively speaking, that much weaker than the AFC, to where it's it's fair to say that Peoples with the 49ers, without even a quarterback, would have a good shot at reaching a couple Super Bowls. It's possible, and it's not to discredit anyone within the NFC or to discredit Peoples himself. It's just saying that the AFC has a deeper conference, so will allow for Peoples to kind of make better runs at it. You talk about the rest of the division. You got the free smoke connection between KJ at the Cardinals and Peoples with the 49ers already kind of coincidentally happened that way. And then, of course, you have Eric with the Rams, so we're just missing the Seahawks user, and then we can kind of round out the NFC West. But that's already an interesting dynamic between KJ with the Cardinals and Peoples with the 49ers. Will KJ kind of have his number as someone who has claimed to be the better user, or will Peoples with the better roster and someone who has been proven in SOB kind of get the edge on him throughout the entirety of the franchise? That's a nice rivalry to watch and keep your eye on throughout the duration of the franchise. But moving on to number 14 now. Yes, this was the other team that I would say is on par with the 49ers in terms of a steal. The Buffalo Bills falling to 14 is a crime, just as the 49ers were, only I'd say the Bills are a better team. From a standpoint of winning, if you want to win right now, the Bills are better than the 49ers. And purely because of that guy on the left, Josh Allen, is the separating factor. He's the cover athlete. He has the strongest arm probably in the league. He at least has the strongest arm in Madden because he has 99 throw power. He has all the abilities. He can move. He can make any throw. He has accuracy. He has poise. He's everything you want in a Madden franchise quarterback, and he's a great franchise quarterback, period. And then you get into the weapons that he has to throw to. Stephon Diggs on your right, you can see. You got Dawson Knox still. You got Dalton Kincaid they drafted, so you got a nice little tight end duo that's a sneaky tight end duo. You have, of course, have Gabe Davis. Those are the kind of the main guys that you have. Anyone else you can kind of decide who you want to throw in there, but that's enough to work off of in terms of a foundation of a weapon core to kind of do whatever you want, right? Of course, you have Damian Harris they got from the Patriots. That's going to be your primary running back. I know C-Mart likes to run the ball probably a little more than most users would with the Bills. He'll be balanced. He definitely emphasizes balance. So the offense isn't a perfect fit, but this is the best offense he's ever had. So the fit you can throw out the window. It's not perfect, but it's the best that he's ever had in terms of the talent on the offensive side of the ball in SOB. And then, of course, you got Deion Dawkins and Mitch Morse on the offensive line. Other than that, you kind of got to fill out the offensive line. There's kind of a sneaky little bit of a weakness there for C-Mart and the Bills. But I don't think anything that'll hold him back from reaching the potential contending title that we've given him next to his threat level. And then you move on to the defense, and of course you got Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, and Ed Oliver on the defensive line. Those guys are going to get after the passer. They're going to stop the run. And I think this defense as a whole probably instills more excitement as someone who watches C-Mart play occasionally than the offense does, although I think the offense will create exciting plays. I think his defense is more innovative. It has more creativity. It has more diversity, and it has more. It has just like something extra to it that like a lot of other users don't bring. So having those three guys to highlight defensive line, you have Matt Milano on the second level. Of course, they lost Tremaine Edmonds to Chicago, who we'll talk about later on. And then you have in the secondary, you obviously have Jordan Poyer, Tre'Davious White, Micah Hyde, Turin Johnson, Ka'ir Elam, just to name like a handful of guys. And those are obviously the highlights of the defense and why this defense is going to be fun to watch with C-Mart, because you're going to be able to mix man, you're going to be able to mix zone, you're going to run combo coverages, you're going to be able to roll safeties over, you're going to be able to play a lot of two shell or a lot of plays where Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde can do, one can do the other's job. Like they're probably the most reversible safeties in terms of role, in a pair of safeties that you have in the league to start off. And of course, Tre'Davious White's a shutdown corner. So it's just a really nice secondary to build off of and to start with. It's a really nice offense. If we re-rated everyone based on the team that they had along with the user, C-Mart would be probably top 8 at the very least, because this is a deadly combination. This is going to be dangerous. So everyone watch out for C-Mart with the Buffalo Bills. It's going to be a dangerous combination. And what's even scarier for the AFC and the AFC East, but the AFC as a whole, is that this is only the second team listed in the AFC East. Jason picked the Patriots at 29. C-Mart picked the Bills at 14. We still have the Jets and the Dolphins to come off the board. So two top 13 users will have the Jets and the Dolphins. So this division is going to be pretty good, if I do say so myself. And C-Mart with the Bills is going to be an early threat / early potential favorite to win that division. Moving on to 12, or rather 13. We have Jay Will with the Cowboys. I'm not sure if he had the Cowboys ever before, but I know he's a Cowboys fan, and he finally has them now, and he is a contender with them. This Cowboys roster is loaded. They're ready to win now, and this is a really good fit. I don't know if it's the best fit that we've had so far, but it's a really good fit. Starting with the offensive line, you have obviously Zach Martin and Tyron Smith, two future Hall of Famers, two great offensive linemen that are going to help set the tone for offensive games the way Jay Will wants to play them. He's going to make guys play them that way. Obviously, you have Tyler Smith on the line as well, another good piece. You're talking about the weapons. You got CeeDee Lamb, who's going to be a stud the whole franchise for him. You got Brandon Cooks, who's a nice deep threat who can take the top off, help out CeeDee Lamb. You got Michael Gallup, so a nice little complementary duo to go along with CeeDee Lamb. And then you got Tony Pollard, obviously, in the backfield, who's going to be electric. Who's Jay Will, I feel like, is going to maximize back there. And then you talk about Dak, obviously distributing the ball. Dak is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFC, and he's going to get the job done for him. I think it's a really good quarterback to go along with Jay Will because he's not going to get paid a crazy amount of money, but he's also not going to he's not going to be the guy that you expect to win the game for him, and he's going to run a nice balanced offense, a nice tight ship. So I think that'll work for Jay Will. Now talking about the defense, you of course got Micah Parsons spearheading that unit. Phenomenal player. You can do whatever you want with him. Jay Will's going to probably get pretty creative with him. You obviously got DeMarcus Lawrence along with that, Sam Williams, and Mazi Smith. You got that nice little group of four. DeMarcus Lawrence is obviously the veteran of the group. Micah Parsons is going to be the leader for the entirety of the franchise and the freak athlete, the unicorn that you have at that position. And then Mazi Smith and Sam Williams are both going to be the kind of the pair that kind of carry that into the future along with Micah Parsons. But that's a really good group of four, arguably the best front four that we've listed so far, and even in general. And then you get to the back end. Van Der Esch is obviously anchoring down the linebacking core, and then you get to the back end, and you got Stephon Gilmore, who they acquired. You have Trevon Diggs, you have Malik Hooker, and you have Donovan Wilson, or you have Jerron Kearse, either one, whichever one you prefer there. So that's a really good safety core there. So you just have a really good, well-rounded roster for Jay Will to use. And this is only the second team in the NFC East listed. So it's shaping up to look like on paper, the NFC East will be the best division in the NFC. It's certainly shaping up that way. We'll see if it winds up that way. But Jay Will definitely, I think, validates the contender claim. He's made a Super Bowl in the past. He's made multiple conference championship games. This is arguably the best roster that he's ever had to start. It's really interesting how this blind draft has kind of affected that, like how some people have kind of had these teams fall to them because people are kind of almost anticipating that they'd be gone, or they're readjusting for or anticipating a weaker division. It's just so this blind draft has kind of created opportunities that we haven't had in the past. So it's a really good team that's fallen to Jay Will here. Second team off the NFC East, obviously the Commanders were taken by Novocaine earlier. And we can move to number 12 here. We have Jussim at number 12 with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The first team of the AFC North is taken, and that means every user in the AFC North will be a top 12 user, which is ridiculous, and I don't know if that's ever happened. Someone's going to have to fact check that. I'm not even sure. I'm not sure if it's happened or not, but I don't think it has. So I did give him a threat level fringe, and that's probably the first thing that stuck out to you. You're probably like, why does Jussim get a threat level fringe? And I think that kind of speaks for itself in the sense that like it's the Steelers here, and the Steelers aren't a bad team, but within the confines and the scope of the entirety of the AFC, where you have all these powerhouse teams. Fringe really just means that he's going to make the playoffs sometimes and he's going to miss it sometimes, but he's always going to be in the mix. And that's what I see the Steelers as, and that's what I see Justin as, is kind of the user and the team that's always going to be in the mix. Might not always make it, but always going to be in the mix and going to make it sometimes. Might even make some runs. This was the hardest for me to put in Fringe because it's purely he's only in Fringe because of the surrounding conference. It's just really difficult. Um, and even when we get into the AFC North as a whole, it's going to be really difficult. So it's just not really just team's fault, but it's also like he could have picked another team other than the Steelers since he had the 12th pick, but you want to go with your hometown team. I respect it. I understand. But breaking down, getting to the really core pieces of this team, you obviously have TJ Watt in your left there to go along with Cam Hayward, and that's kind of your defensive line. Those are your star players amongst your defensive line there. They're going to make the big splash plays for you early. They're going to get people behind the chains. They're going to get the ball for you. Those are going to be your duo right there for the defensive line to start off. You get into the linebacking core, and you got Cole Holcomb at the very least kind of in the center of that defense. And then you got on the back end, you got Minka, you can see to your right, as well as Patrick Peterson, who will be a good veteran corner for you to help develop Joey Porter Jr., who's the son of Steelers legend Joey Porter. And kind of rounds out this defense as like this is the strength of this team, and I think this is an interesting choice by Justin just from a schematic perspective, obviously, and a stylistic perspective. Obviously, he kind of picked them due to them being his hometown team. But if you talk about like style, this team is kind of almost opposite to his style, but it's kind of in a good way for Justin because Justin doesn't necessarily have any huge deficiencies in his game. So it's kind of like anything that is slightly deficient is being picked up by the talent of the roster, and anything that is kind of not talented that we'll get in with the offense is kind of lacking talent will kind of be elevated by the user. So it's kind of like the roster and user are compensating for each other. So it's like some synergy there. So it kind of works out for him. Like I said, the only reason he's fringe is because A, the tough conference, B, the tough division. So it's not really on him. But we get into this offense, and you look at Najee Harris, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson. Those are kind of the main guys you look at. And then Kenny Pickett to kind of distribute the ball to him. But there's still – you're going to need pieces on this team to really – if you want to make a run at the AFC, I think, in my opinion, this year, this SOB, you need a team. You need a Super Bowl caliber roster. And if you have to ask the question, is this team Super Bowl caliber? If you have to ask that question at all, I think the answer is no in the AFC. You have to just know that this is a Super Bowl caliber roster. And the reality is that the Steelers team right now is not a Super Bowl caliber roster. So he has to build them out a little bit more. And then maybe they'll exceed this threat level of fringe. I think that was just kind of, like I said, purely a result of the surrounding core of the AFC. But that's the first user of the AFC North to get listed. That's going to be a really intriguing division to break down as we move forward. But we'll move forward to number 11. We have AB with the New York Giants, maybe one of the biggest surprises this far in the draft. Certainly surprised me when I put it in. You have AB, who last year took the Colts to multiple conference championship games, made multiple deep playoff runs, exceeded expectations in 3 seasons, and he takes the New York Giants. He's in a division with Jay Will right now with the Cowboys, with the Commanders, who is Novocaine, and him, and then whoever the Eagles user will be, which we'll talk about later on. But the Giants, like as a roster, are kind of surprisingly really molded to the strengths of AB. And the more I looked at the roster and kind of broke it down and compared it to the strengths and weaknesses of AB's game, the more it made sense. Obviously, on the defensive end, you have Dexter Lawrence, who you see to your left, along with Leonard Williams, Thibodeau and Oji Aziz Ajulari rather are kind of your defensive line pieces or your pass rush pieces that you have there. So that all that defensive line is going to kind of wreak havoc. Dexter Lawrence is going to be in the middle, stopping the run, um, kind of forcing guys to bounce outside and stuff. So that's going to kind of control the line of scrimmage on the defensive end, which is already a plus, obviously. Then you talk about the back end, which is probably the most valuable part for an AB coach defense. You got a Dory Jackson, you got Xavier McKinley, but then the guy, one of the reasons why he picked this team, Deontay Banks, the corner out of Maryland, who's just going to be a stud, 96, 97 speed, something like that. He's going to be a lockdown corner for AB. AB's going to develop into a lockdown corner, and the defense as a whole is just going to be, it's going to be a problem for everyone in the NFC. And that contender could very well change to dynasty really quickly if he develops this team the way I'm sure he intends to. So watch out for him. He could be really dangerous. Obviously, you got to mention Bobby Okereke at the linebacking position as well. And then you get into the offense, and you talk about Andrew Thomas on the offensive line. You talk about John Michael Schmitz at center. You talk about Evan Neal at the other tackle position. You really just got to fill those guard spots out if you're AB. And then you got that offensive line kind of really well filled out, but it's already nice to start off. And then you look at the weapons. You got, of course, Saquon, who's going to kind of fill that Jonathan Taylor role that he was using last year with the Colts. You talk about Darren Waller. That's going to be a really good piece. You talk about Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell, and Wan'Dale Robinson, and that's kind of going to be his receivers that he's going to develop. And I believe that he will develop. I have good confidence in that. And then you got Daniel Jones, who I think he'll also develop pretty well, at least to whatever his ceiling is at this point in time. I think he'll reach that with AB. So overall, I mean, this is a contending team in the NFC. This has made the NFC a lot more interesting than it would have been without him. So, and realistically, like I said, this is probably the best team that he's had to start off in SOB. I'd say it's better than the Colts team last year, and the Colts team last year was the best team before this year. So I'd say this team is the best team he's had to start off. I'd say the NFC is considerably weaker than the AFC from last year, personally. And I think that overall he'll be a legitimate contender, potentially even more than that if he maximizes this team to its full capability. But now we're finally going to wind into the top 10 users and teams. You got number 10, you got Key, you got the New York Jets. Back-to-back New York teams. Back-to-back big, just big deal users that play in big games constantly, make big plays, get big wins. And two New York teams, it's only fitting that it's Key and it's AB back-to-back with the Giants and Jets. And talk about the third team in the AFC East here. So the first thing I want to address is that C-Mart and Key are going to be in the division with each other and play twice a year, every year, which is a win for the league as a whole because it's going to be fun to watch, really fun to watch, I think, every year for them to play twice a year. I think they've been waiting for that. I think we've been waiting for that. So I'm glad to see it finally kind of work itself out and happen, even though it wasn't kind of intended by either of them. It just kind of happened that way. And it's going to be entertaining to watch that twice a year. And then you get into this roster, right, for Key and the Jets. And it starts with Sauce, the guy on your left. He's going to be Patrick Surtain, everything Patrick Surtain is for Key, only he's going to be with a better surrounding cast really around him. So it's a big deal. Sauce is the best corner Key's probably ever had, period. He can debate that, but I'd say Sauce is. He's going to probably take away receivers on a weekly basis. You have DJ Reed to complement him back there. You got potentially Ashton Davis if he wants to develop him. And then on the front defensive line, you have Quinnen Williams. You have John Franklin Myers. You have Carl Lawson. And then you have C.J. Mosley in the middle as a linebacker. So you have a really good defense. Now I'm going to address the biggest question you guys probably have, or at least Key probably has, is why he's only a playoff level threat, right? Now the reality is
Your offense is led by what 39-year-old quarterback Aaron Rodgers. I'm an Aaron Rodgers fan. I like Aaron Rodgers. I think he's a great quarterback, but in Madden terms, he's not going to last very long. He's probably going to play like a year, maybe two, and that's your window. That's your big window of time for truly contending. That's it. Like that is the window. And I think there's so many other good AFC teams that are just better right now. And I think this Jets team needs time to get on their level. And by that time, Aaron Rodgers is going to be gone. So he's kind of at an impasse here where it's like, well, you got to win now because that's kind of the window of Aaron Rodgers. But the rest of the team isn't ready, in my opinion, to win with Key in a Super Bowl. So unless he can somehow manufacture another franchise quarterback, I have him at playoffs because I think he'll be consistently in the playoffs, probably every year, almost every year, if not every year. But I don't see him as a true contender because I think the rest of the team won't be ready as he makes maybe a deep run the first year or two. And then by the time his team is ready, he's not going to have a quarterback. He's not going to have Aaron Rodgers. So it's going to be kind of messed up. But now getting into the offense, uh, you got a good offense. You have weapons. You have a good team. You got starting with the offensive line. You have Elijah Vera Tucker. You have Mekhi Becton, Laken Tomlinson, Dwayne Brown. That's a quality offensive line. That's a really good offensive line. That'll work. And then look at weapons. You got Dalvin Cook and Brees Hall as a 1-2 punch. That'll work with Key. That's going to be really good. Like that's going to be a really good, probably the best 1-2 punch in the league in the first year. And you got Garrett Wilson as a receiver, along with Mecole Hardman, and you're cooking. You have a good offense. Like it's a good quality offense. And of course, Aaron Rodgers is going to elevate them. But unless he can win the first couple years or find that franchise quarterback, I don't see him winning a Super Bowl, and that's why I'm in the playoff tier. And I do have C-Mart in the contender tier because Josh Allen's, his SOB lifespan is going to be a lot longer than Aaron Rodgers. And I know Key isn't technically reliant on a quarterback as much as a lot of other top users. But I think he needs that type of quarterback to make those plays when he needs them to win those close games. And without them, it's really hard. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's really hard, and that's why I have him listed as a playoff team. And now we'll move more into the top 10 at number 9 here. We have Casey with the Seattle Seahawks. That is one of the final one of the final 3 remaining NFC teams off the board here. We have 2 more NFC teams in the top 10. The rest are AFC teams. So Casey is the Seahawks, obviously. I have him listed as contender, and that rounds out the NFC West, obviously. So the NFC West, the rest of it is KJ with the Cardinals. That's going to be really exciting. That's the biggest question mark of the draft, like we said. Eric with the Rams. It's going to take him a while to get that team to be competitive if he's able to at all. It's going to be a really tough job, probably the toughest job that any GM has. And then you have the 49ers with Peoples. So that kind of rounds out a pretty interesting division with Casey with the Seahawks here. The biggest rivalry to start off will probably be Peoples with the Niners, Casey with the Seahawks. And then I think KJ will work his way in with the Cardinals when he gets that team kind of constructed the way he wants. But this Seahawks team has probably a higher ceiling, talking about roster talent that they currently have, than that Cardinals team does. I don't know if they have a higher ceiling than the 49ers per se, but they might. Like, this is a really talented Seahawks team that's pretty young. So we'll get into it. They do have some roster deficiencies, but I think it's overall a good fit. We'll start with the offense. We'll talk about the offensive line. They got Abraham Lucas, the young tackle, and Charles Cross, the young tackle. A good young tackle duo for Casey to run his outside zones if he wants to run those. It'll help him run the ball. It'll help him pass protect for his deep drops that he likes to take. You got Damian Lewis at guard. So overall, just a pretty quality little foundation to build off of an offensive line. I think Geno will be a good quarterback for Casey. It makes sense. Probably not going to have to overpay to keep him. Probably going to do what he needs him to do. Not going to be elite. Not going to be bad. So it's kind of a perfect quarterback for Casey in my mind, the way he kind of runs his offense. And then you look at weapons. You got DK, of course, as you see to your right. You got Kenneth Walker, who's going to, I think, probably vie for MVP on an annual basis. The way Casey's going to find a way to get him the ball consistently. You got Noah Fant, who's going to be a stud for him. You got Tyler Lockett, who's going to make some plays. Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be a great player. And then Dwayne Eskridge. So you're just like all these weapons and weapons and weapons. It's just going to be tough. And then I think Kenneth Walker is kind of the main guy to watch on the offensive side of the ball for Casey. It's going to be really fun to watch that. And then you transition over to the defense. And the primary kind of concern for probably the team as a whole is like the defensive line. You have Uchenna Nwosu, who's like a decent pass rusher, but that's kind of like your number one if you're the Seahawks, which is like not ideal because he's like a low end number two at best, right? And he's your best pass rusher. So you got to develop or find pass rushers. And that's kind of, I probably don't see Casey contending very early, like the first year or the second year, because of the lack of pass rush. And kind of, he's a very run game, defensive oriented user. And without a pass rush and, probably causing him to blitz a lot to get any pass rush consistently, it's probably going to take him a little bit to contend because he's going to need a consistent pass rush and be able to rush with 3 and 4. And win those to be able to kind of consistently win those tough games. But then you get to the back end with the linebacking cores. You got Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks, maybe the second best linebacking core behind Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner. Now, Bobby Wagner's up there in age, but having that duo for a little bit should be really nice. Should help anchor this defense. Should help compensate a little bit for the lack of pass rush. And then the back end, you got Jamal Adams, of course. You got Quandre Diggs, is a good little safety duo there. You got Tariq Woolen, as you see to your left, who's probably the main reason he took this Seattle team. With 98 speed as a big corner, has the ability to probably take away anyone once he gets developed. Julian Love, who's going to be kind of a sneaky secondary piece, kind of move him potentially to corner, maybe keep him at safety and move Quandre Diggs or Jamal Adams to like a slot position maybe. It really depends on what he wants to do. And then Devon Witherspoon, who's the rookie that they drafted at corner, is kind of the last rounding out piece. But overall, just this team looks really good. It'll be entertaining to see what Casey how he maneuvers with this team, what he does. He's definitely a contender, as you can see at the top right, with this team. Now, like I said, I doubt his early ability to contend, but I think the window will be like a big window once he gets kind of pass rushers because this team's kind of young. Anybody who's kind of older, I feel like he'll be able to fill in with like any veteran who can kind of play decent football, i.e. Bobby Wagner, Geno Smith. I think he'll be able to fill and get like a decent veteran quarterback to fill that role, get a decent veteran linebacker to fill that role. I don't think he necessarily needs superstars to fill these roles and these vacancies that are going to occur. But overall, I think he'll probably vie for his division on an annual basis, but early on it'll probably people's division to lose, and then as this kind of progresses throughout the course of SOB, it'll transition to a 3-horse race. But Casey has probably the highest ceiling in terms of roster talent and kind of what he starts with. So that's where we're at here with the NFC West, and moving on to number 8. Number 8, we have Mike with the Bears, and that leaves one NFC team left after this. So there is one NFC team in the final 7 users. The rest are AFC teams, but that takes the Bears off the board, completes the NFC North, allows us to kind of open that discussion up without kind of hiding anything. We have obviously Rick took the Packers. We have Pep who took the Vikings, Jasik who took the Lions, and now Mike who took the Bears. So it goes without saying Mike is going to be the heavy favorite in this division for the whole franchise, probably. Now, someone could shift that narrative very quickly if they have early success. But Mike has kind of the pedigree and the history, the body of work to show that he should be the favorite in this NFC North for the entirety of the franchise, at least going into it, right? And that's why he's going to have the contender moniker as well. If he was in the AFC with this team, he probably wouldn't have the contender moniker because this team is not exactly built to contend within the confines of the AFC right now. Now, they have pieces that could build onto that, but with a user like Mike in a conference that is the NFC that has some top heavy talent and then kind of tapers off, He can absolutely contend throughout the duration. I think it's going to take him a while to get this team truly able to contend because there's some powerhouses in the NFC that we've talked about already, and that we will talk about one more. That it's going to be really hard to overcome those guys, at least early on until you build this team. But overall, he is definitely a contender. Um, in general, you talk about the roster talent that this team does have. You start with the linebacking core. They acquired Tremaine Edmonds after getting rid of Roquan Smith, sending him to Baltimore. You also have T.J. Edwards to complement him, so it's a good little linebacking duo. That's probably right there with the Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks. It's right there. You can flip that in the Seahawks, vice versa, whatever. And then on the back end, you have Eddie Jackson, Jalen Johnson, Jaquan Brisker is kind of your secondary pieces that you kind of want to utilize early on. And then from an offensive standpoint, obviously you have Darnell Wright, the tackle that they drafted. You have DJ Moore, who they traded for from Carolina. You have Darnell Mooney and you have Chase Claypool, who you got from Pittsburgh. And then you have Justin Fields, obviously, as you see to your right. So the offensive upside is kind of why he took this team where he took them. He got what he probably wanted, which is on paper a weaker division. I don't know if it necessarily will be, but on paper it's a weaker division. He got the offensive upside. He got Justin Fields and the mobility that he brings. And he's going to have a lot of work to do to construct this roster to be a super powerhouse. But within the confines of the NFC, you give him a shot. Within the confines of the division, you give him a shot any year. Personally, I wouldn't pick him to win the first couple of years, the NFC, until he gets that team straightened out. But I think generally he is a contender for sure. But yeah, the NFC North as a whole, we kind of covered that. So we'll move on to number 7. You have TJ with the Cincinnati Bengals, and we tackled the second team off the board in the AFC North here. And you also have him listed as a contender here. So TJ with the Bengals is scary. You got to describe it in one word. This is almost everything you would want from a TJ Talley, run team. It's dangerous. Like, go down the board. You start with the defense. You start with the linebackers. You got Logan Wilson and Akeem Davis-Gaither. TJ Talley is one of the best users in all of SOB, period. And then you give him two, borderline elite potential coverage linebackers like Akeem Davis-Gaither and Logan Wilson, and it becomes really scary in the middle of that field, right? He's probably going to get a lot of lurks with those guys. And then you look on the defensive line, you got DJ Reader and Trey Hendrickson with Sam Hubbard to kind of start off the defensive line, generate some pass rush. Of course, he's going to throw some blitzes in there, so they're not super critical. TJ's a blitz-heavy user, so that's going to be an issue. And then, of course, you have on the back end, Chibodi Awuzie, Cam Taylor-Britt, Daxon Hill are kind of the main guys you want to highlight. All those guys are going to be studs. They have other corners and other defensive backs that he's probably going to develop. But those are just the three, the big three in the back end. It's going to be really tough to, when he gets this defense rolling on all cylinders, attacking, blitzing, when he gets these DBs developed, it's going to be hard to move the football because he's going to blitz and he's going to force you to move the ball. He does not really even need to get elite defensive linemen because of his constant blitzing. He just needs those defensive backs to get developed, and those linebackers are kind of already where he wants them. You might want to boost him a little bit, but that defense is right kind of where he needs it to be to contend right now. I'm sure throughout the year he'll develop them completely to where he wants them to be. And then you talk about the really, really scary part, which is the offense. You start with the offensive line with Orlando Brown, Leo Collins, Alex Kappa, Ted Karras, Jonah Williams, and you just have a complete 5-man front of just almost a brick wall. There's no superstars there, but it's a solid cement wall front where there are no glaring weaknesses. Everyone should, on a Madden standpoint, protect Joe Burrow, keep him clean, allow him to distribute the ball. And then you get to the weapons, which is the best fit any group has to a user. It is the weapons with TJ here. You have Jamar Chase, of course, who front lines is the front man of that group over here to the right. You got Joe Mixon, who's the perfect type of running back for TJ. You have T. Higgins. You have Tyler Boyd. So you have such a complement of skill sets there with the receivers in general. Of course, it'd be good for anyone, but with TJ and the way he distributes the ball, the way his pace of play is, the way he attacks the field vertically, the way Joe Burrow can make any throw and TJ tries any throw, the way Joe Mixon can break tackles and TJ will punish you if you have a light box. All of it collectively works together. And this is an extremely dangerous team. And part of me was tempted to put him at a dynasty level threat. But because he has never won multiple Super Bowls in a single Madden before, I just couldn't do it because he just hasn't proven that he's been able to do it. If he had done that before, then I probably would have placed him there. But he just, because it's almost like a perfect fit. They're dangerous early. They're going to be dangerous often. And he's going to be a favorite, one of the favorites to win the AFC every year. The AFC is loaded. Excuse me. The fact that there's going to be 5 more AFC teams following him that are of equal, about give or take, equal danger level is a testament to how dangerous the AFC is as a whole. But we'll get into the full AFC North discussion after we reveal the last 2 users in the AFC North. But the division as a whole should be scary. If the second one is getting revealed at 7, that should speak for itself. But going to number 6 here. You have Xavier, you have the Browns, you have the third member of the AFC North, and you have another scary combination. Getting TJ and Xavier twice a year is going to be fun to watch. Getting Jussim and Xavier twice a year is going to be fun to watch. Getting Jussim and TJ twice a year is going to be fun to watch. Those are 3 rivalries that are happening twice a year. 3 relatively evenly matched users with teams that are just going to complement their play styles. It's going to be great football to watch and competitive all the way through. But getting into Xavier specifically here, he always competes with the Browns, always contends with the Browns. I have him as contender. If this roster or Deshaun Watson himself were just a little better or just like good enough to where he could elevate this team a little bit, I may even have him at Dynasty too. So he kind of was just like on the precipice as well at Dynasty. If there was a tier between contender and Dynasty, I'd probably only have TJ and Xavier in that tier. They're right there on the brink of Dynasty, but they're not quite there, so they kind of wind up in contender. But we'll start with the defense on this team, and it all starts with Myles Garrett, guy to your left there. He's going to wreck games. X kind of has issues with him sometimes in the terms of like he doesn't generate the pressures or the sacks that he wants him to, but he's always a menace. He's going to make plays for him. He's got Zadarius Smith to complement him now. It's going to be dangerous. Moving Myles Garrett around, generating pressures with him, stopping the run with him. It's going to be tough to deal with for anybody. And then the linebacking core, you got JOK and Taki. A good duo that X is traditionally able to develop pretty well. They have good potential. They're going to need some work, though. And then on the back end, you got Denzel Ward, you got Greg Newsome. Those are kind of the main 2 right there. You can build off everything else. That's kind of the defense. It's really like superstar oriented. Without the superstars, it's kind of mediocre, but you got those superstars to boost the defense up. But I think the way Xavier plays defense, it makes sense. To have a defense that plays that way, it kind of fits, and it's always worked for him. He kind of builds off of it. He's one of the best GMs in the league, so it makes sense. From an offensive standpoint, offensive line's arguably the best in the league, probably the best run blocking in the league. You have Joe Bitonio, you have Wyatt Teller, you have Jack Conklin, you have Jedrick Wills. Like you have this stacked offensive line that's going to create these massive holes for Nick Chubb. Going to create time for Deshaun Watson to get the ball to Amari Cooper, to get the ball to David Njoku, to get the ball to Donovan Peoples-Jones. Like, it's going to be tough to deal with this team. Stylistically, it fits Xavier just as well as TJ and the Bengals fit together. And they're in the same division, and they're playing twice a year, every year. It's going to be really tough. It's going to be fun to watch, and it's going to be entertaining, to say the least. But like I said, Deshaun Watson, the main reason, if he was rated higher, if he was given abilities, something like that, I'd probably put X in the Dynasty too. but he's just on the precipice outside of it. Um, and I'm sure he's looking to prove that wrong and belong in the dynasty tier. But we'll move in finally to the top five here. And here we are with the top five. We have at number five, we have Console with the Miami Dolphins, a familiar sight here, and the first user to have the moniker of a dynasty level threat. We talked about it with TJ and X potentially being in that conversation, but Console actually does land there because of his previous success and ability to show that he can win multiple Super Bowls with the Dolphins and won Madden. Now you can say, "Oh, that was a long time ago." Well, I mean, last year everyone seems to forget he made a Super Bowl with the Atlanta Falcons in the second season. That Falcons team was good. Don't get me wrong; he built them to be a good team, but they were not. They should not have been in the Super Bowl in the second year. That's just the reality of it. They should not have been in the Super Bowl in the second year. They weren't that good from a talent standpoint. He was in there because of his user skill. So credit to him there. That's why he earned the Dynasty Threat moniker. And this, I've deemed and dubbed this team Console's Dream Team because this is a dream team for Console to start off with. Anybody who knows how Console wants to build a team, this team is the perfect way to start off a team. You have Jalen Ramsey, who speaks for himself, Javon Holland on the back end, Xavier Howard, Cater Kahu, Cam Smith, Keon Crossan. These are all defensive backs who are fast, talented, stud defensive backs who are going to make plays on the back end. Those are all guys he gets to start with. And then on the offensive side of the ball, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, um, Robbie Anderson, Elijah Higgins, the rookie tight end that's fast, Mostert to back up the rookie Devon A-Chain with 95 speed, who starts off as a 21-year-old. That's the perfect running back for Console to start off. And you got Armstead at tackle. You got Jalen Phillips to rush the passer. Like, this is just the perfect team for Console to start off with. Of course, Jerome Baker at linebacker. It's got speed. They got glamour. They got swag. They got defense. They can lock you up. They can shoot the ball deep. They can pound you. This is the team that Console would like to start with. I'm sure every year as his team to start off with. This is an ideal team. This fits him perfectly to a T. This is going to be dangerous to watch. And to put this in perspective, the AFC East, we're now going to see C-Mart, Key, Console, Jason, all in the same division, playing each other twice a year. What games those are going to be? Those are going to be fun to watch. Console, Key, C-Mart, all in the same division. It's going to be really must-see TV. And that AFC East has a legitimate claim as the best division in the league on paper going into the year. We'll see if it lives up to that. But as of right now, they have a legit claim. But moving further into the top five to number four, we have Trells with the Philadelphia Eagles. We have him also as a dynasty level threat. This is the final NFC team, and with good reason. They're the only NFC team to be ranked a dynasty team, and there is a lot to break down here because this team is arguably the best team to start off a franchise in Madden or SOB history. This team is loaded at every spot. This team is ridiculous. Along to go with Trells, who's obviously a top user. He was voted number 4. So you have, obviously with the O-line, you have Lane Johnson, you have Jason Kelce, you have Jordan Mailata, you have Landon Dickerson, you have Cam Jurgens. Just to start, those are your 5 starters. Obviously, you're going to have to replace Kelce and Lane Johnson moving forward in the franchise. But to start off within the first year or two, you are going to make strong runs, and that offensive line is going to be arguably the biggest reason why. It's a dominant offensive line. Weapons, you got A.J. Brown, you got Devonta Smith, you got Dallas Goedert, you got DeAndre Swift, Quez Watkins, who's a deep threat. It's just, those are all kinds of weapons to deal with. Like, that's tough to deal with and manage and maintain and defend. And then on defense, you got Big Play Slay, you got James Bradbury, you got Calais Ringo, who's a young a young corner with 94 speed, 95 acceleration, 6'2". You got Josiah Scott, who might be able to replace Avante Maddox if Avante Maddox kind of gives him problems in the slot as he has in the past. You got Terrell Edmonds, you got Justin Evans, you got Kevon Wallace. You have a loaded defensive backfield. Um, you got a loaded offensive line, loaded defensive backfield, loaded weapons. Um, and then you talk about Jalen Hurts. He has abilities. He had a great year last year in real life, of course. He has some good abilities. Charles is going to maximize those, whatever scheme he chooses to use. He's going to 100% maximize Jalen Hurts' ability. He's going to distribute the ball to all these weapons. It's going to be dangerous and hard to stop. Then you talk about the linebackers. You got Zach Cunningham, Nakobe Dean, Miles Jack. Three linebackers, whoever he decides to start his two, are going to make plays, make splash plays. They always do. Nakobe Dean's probably going to be one of those three, one of those two. And then the center and the most valuable part of this team, in my opinion, is the D-line, the pass rush, the rotation, led by Hassan Reddick. You got Hassan Reddick leading that group, as we said. Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith, Derek Barnett, Kyron Johnson. You just got so many stud players that Charles can rotate, that can move around. He can use in certain down and distances, play to their strengths. It's just they're so versatile. There's some young guys, there's some older guys, there's some guys in their prime. It's such a good mix of players. It's probably the deepest group of any position group in the league and potentially ever if you talk about real life or SOB. It's just ridiculous how do you defend them? I don't know. How do you block them? I have no idea. It's going to be a headache. And he is clearly far and away, in my opinion, the favorite to win the NFC, period. Like, every year he's going to be the favorite to win the NFC. Every single season, unless someone shifts that narrative. In my mind, that is going to be the narrative. Until someone changes it, I think this is the best roster in the NFC. I think this is the best user in the NFC. And I think that this team is just the best team he's ever had to start with. You talk about the NFC East as a whole is going to be interesting as well now. You have AB, you have J. Will, you have Trells, you have Novocaine. That's going to be a really interesting division to watch. Like, that's going to be really fun to watch. That's the best division, in my opinion, in the NFC. You have the AB Trells rivalry, I think, is going to be a thing. Now, AB has never beaten Trells, to my knowledge, so he's going to kind of get his potential revenge there. J. Will's always kind of a sneaky wild card, can beat Trells, can potentially compete with AB. Got the Cowboys. That's going to be a really interesting and sneaky good division there, I think, as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we talk about divisions. But Trells with the Eagles, favorite to win the NFC, dynasty level threat. It's going to be scary. Number 3, we have Smoke with the Kansas City Chiefs. And this surprised me when he submitted it. It's probably surprising you now. It was a surprising pick. I didn't expect Smoke to pick the Chiefs, but he did. He's got, obviously, Patrick Mahomes. We know he can make every throw. We know he can move around. We know he's going to be the best quarterback in the league probably for the entirety of the franchise. That's the reality of it. Travis Kelce, same thing. Now the only difference is the duration. He's not going to last as long as Mahomes. He's going to taper off probably after a few years, but he's going to be phenomenal for a while. Chris Jones, kind of the same thing. He's going to be dominant as an interior rusher. He's going to kind of lead the defensive unit. And then you get into the O-line. You got probably the second best offensive line behind the Eagles. You got Creed Humphrey. You got Joe Tooney. You got Trey Smith. And then you got Donovan Smith and Jawan Taylor as like the tackles, who are kind of the weaker parts of the offensive line. But the interior line is so good that it kind of compensates for the average tackles. But then you got Nick Bolton. You got Willie Gay, Drew Tranquill, all 87 or speed or better linebackers that Smoke's going to utilize on the defensive end. L'Jarius Sneed's going to be a lockdown corner for Smoke. Trent McDuffie is going to be a stud. Kadarius Toney is going to be great. Pacheco, they're both going to be fast, great players for Smoke to use. MVS is going to be that deep threat for him. George Karlaftis and Felix Ndike Uzama are going to be the D-line pieces around Chris Jones that he kind of develops. And I think kind of as a whole, this is kind of like a better version we talked about earlier about how like the Steelers are kind of like like with Justin, like the defense complements his kind of small deficiencies on the defensive side, and his offensive user as a skill set kind of complements the deficiencies from a roster talent perspective from the Steelers. This is like that times 10 with Smoke here. Um, he has smaller deficiencies probably on offense and defense, or he doesn't really have any, excuse me, on defense, but he has smaller deficiencies on offense um, with a better offense around him, obviously. And then he has like no deficiencies on defense from a user standpoint, and he's going to make up for anything that the roster messes up. So this team is going to be really difficult to beat. Now, Smoke every year has taken a step up offensively already. Last year in the Remix League with the Chargers, he took a huge step up. The year before, he competed. Obviously, before the Remix League, he competed with the Bills, had a great offense. And then the year before that, he had the Cardinals with Kyler Murray. Every year, he's kind of taken a step up and been able to kind of progress. And I expect another step up with the Chiefs. I expect the same quality of defensive play, which is top of the league. And I expect a really tough team to beat, a team that's going to vie for multiple Super Bowls, and a team that is going to be a threat to win the Super Bowl early and often. Moving into the final two. You got Beige with the Colts. This probably surprises everyone as well because that means that Beige officially has probably taken the worst team he has ever had to start SOB from year one. Now, this team isn't bad. Obviously, we're taking the two for a reason, but it is the worst team that Beige has ever started with. So he's taking a team that he's going to have to probably build. The offensive line, he's going to have to kind of build around Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, Braden Smith. You kind of have those guys as those offensive line pieces. You kind of got to build around them a little bit. You got to build the defense up. The defense is going to have a bunch of holes. Like you're going to have to completely kind of construct that defense. You got DeForest Buckner. You have Shaq Leonard as guys who are going to be veterans, make plays for you while you build that defense out. But by the time you build it out, they're probably not going to be there. Jonathan Taylor's status is obviously up in the air in real life. So he picks them in spite of that, even if they trade Jonathan Taylor for a 7th-round pick or whatever to whoever. He still chose the Colts in spite of that, but that's a factor. And then Michael Pittman leads the receiver group, including Isaiah McKenzie, Alec Pierce, Josh Downs. You got some weapons there, but nothing super special. There's two reasons why this is listed as dynasty. Number one, and the most important, is Beige and his pedigree and his ability to consistently win Super Bowls, which he has shown to do. He's won multiple Super Bowls with every team he has played with since Madden 19. No, I'm sorry. He's won at least one Super Bowl in every Madden since Madden 19. So Madden 19, Madden 20, Madden 21, Madden 22, Madden 23. He has won at least one Super Bowl in every Madden, and he won multiple in every year but one. So it's kind of clear why he's as the dynasty moniker. But the second reason is the guy on your left, Anthony Richardson. He's probably going to be the best quarterback that Beige will have ever had. When this conversation is said and done, 10 seasons from now in SOB, that's probably going to be the best quarterback Beige has ever had. And that's extremely scary. Now, he has a lot of constructing and building to do with this team. He has a lot of work to do. But Anthony Richardson's upside, Beige's pedigree, and the confidence that you have in him as a user is high, as well as the division of the AFC South isn't the strongest either, right? You have Scruggs, who made some good runs with the Rams last year, right? And then you have the Stacks with the Texans, and you have Raw Dog with the Titans. Both users that can compete, but they're not on Beige's level, and that's kind of been shown, right? So with a lighter division, he's going to need some time to probably build out his team. But once he gets it constructed by around year 3, he'll be vying for a Super Bowl probably every year. So we'll finally get to number 1. Number 1 is myself, obviously, with the Ravens. I'm not going to get into much of a roster breakdown or talk about how I'm going to fit with the Ravens or anything like that. I'm just excited to get my team. I appreciate you guys for taking the time to make your lists. I appreciate um, that you guys have been patient with this process. I understand it's been different, but I hope this kind of as a whole has been uh, worth it as an experience, the wait here. But yeah, the Ravens is a team that I have. Instead of talking about my team and breaking them down, I'm excited. Of course, I'm excited to play with them. But like, let's talk about this AFC North. We got Jasim at 12 with the Steelers. We got TJ at 7 with the Bengals. Xavier at number 6 with the Browns. And then I picked the Ravens. And this on paper absolutely has the potential to be the best division in SOB history. And in my opinion, and I am biased because I'm in this division, but I think this is the best division in the league right now. I don't think just on paper. I think it just is. Like, I think it is the best division in the league. I think all the users are proven, and I think it's loaded. Like, every user is a top 12 user. Now that's just impressive. I think that's just kind of the bottom line of it. But we'll get into the full list here. This is or rather all 32 of the SOB 24 team draft. As you can see here, that's everyone listed there. If you want to screenshot, post it or whatever. And then this is the team draft by conference. So everyone in the red is in the AFC. Everyone in the blue is in the NFC. You can kind of see how in the top 16 there's a lot more red, and the bottom 16 is a lot more blue. And that's kind of why I was saying like a lot. The AFC had kind of a considerable margin over the NFC, at least on paper, because this is kind of how the draft went out. This is kind of how a lot of people were predicting it was going to go. So it's not super shocking, but it is the way it turned out. Um, and so that kind of gives you a breakdown from a conference perspective. And then we kind of finally get to a division perspective here. You look at the top left with the AFC North. We discussed them, how potentially like how fun that to watch that's going to be, how insane that's going to be, how competitive that's going to be. I think top left is the most competitive and best slash most well-rounded division in the league. AFC East probably going to be the most entertaining division in the league. You got Console, Key, C-Mart who are going to battle every year. Jason's going to try to get some punches in there. There's going to be some fun rivals to watch. AFC West, I think, is going to be Smoke's division to lose. I think he's probably going to run that division. Rhino's a clear number 2, and then you got Kattenbross and Kuzu kind of vying for the third spot. Now, obviously, that can change up, but in my mind, that's kind of how the AFC West is structured. Bottom left with the AFC South, I think that's Beezy's division to lose. I think Scruggs is a clear number 2, and Stacks and Rado are kind of vying for the third spot. Again, that could change, but that's, in my mind, is how it's going to go. NFC North at the top right, I think is Mike's division to lose. There, you obviously have Pep and Jasik probably vying, and Rick's vying for that second spot. Now, again, that could change my mind. That's pretty interesting, actually, because of how close the rosters are to each other in terms of talent. So the separator really there is going to be user at the top right there. In the NFC East, that's going to be the most entertaining division to watch in the NFC, and probably the second or third most entertaining division to watch in the league, and probably second or third best division in the league, with Trells, AB, J Will, and Novocaine. I think Trells will probably win the division mostly every year, but I think AB and J Will both kind of vie for some division titles as well. I think Novocaine could even throw his hat in there. I haven't really seen him play that much, so I can't speak on his skill and ability that much. Get down to the NFC West, and this is kind of probably the sneakiest, the dark horse of divisions here. Call it the dark horse division with the NFC West, because KJ was number 32 technically, but he's going to be a really good user with the Cardinals. You have Peoples with the 49ers, who's going to exceed his 15th ranking. Eric with the Rams is kind of, he's kind of tied up, but like if he can get out of that, he can pull off some upsets. And then Casey with the Seahawks, of course, is going to perform, I think, up to his number 9 spot. Then you talk about the NFC South, and that's going to be an entertaining division. But you look at everyone's number 20 or lower on the list, or rather higher, whatever you want to phrase it. But that's going to be potentially the parity division. So we got NFC South is the parity division down here. We got the dark horse division with the NFC West. We got the class of the NFC in the NFC East. You got kind of everyone being balanced from a roster standpoint in the NFC North. You got Beege's division in the AFC South, Smoke's division in the AFC West, the Popcorn division in the AFC East, and the paper division, or the most competitive division in my mind on paper, in the AFC North. because I don't see any division being more competitive than that. I think we're going to have 4 teams in the playoffs mostly every year. But yeah, that's the breakdown of all the teams, all the divisions, the conferences, to the extent that I can do it with the information that I have. I appreciate you guys for being patient. Like I said, I appreciate you guys for submitting your list. I appreciate you guys for voting on users' rankings and everything. Like this was the most involved process that in which everyone was involved in the team selection process, more so than they've ever been. So it was really reliant on you guys as users to be responsive to work well as a team. And I know it was difficult and it wasn't perfect. But if this was successful and you guys enjoyed this, then we'll probably continue to do the same thing or a similar thing next year.